Chapter 1: Routine Fluorescence. The hum was substratal. A vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. It permeated the QFS observation deck, a constant reminder of the barely contained energies churning beneath the reinforced plasteel floor. Javier Reyes rested his wrench against the railing, the cool metal a welcome contrast to the persistent thrum. He wiped a smear of synthetic lubricant from his cheek, leaving a faint gray streak. His eyes scanned the diagnostic panel, green lights indicating nominal function across 90% of the quantum foam stabilizer's core systems. Amber flickered intermittently on stabilization matrix C7. Normal variance. Expected. Anything alarming, Javier? Dr. Samira Khan's voice, calm and precise, came from behind him. She approached, tablet in hand, her lab coat immaculate against the industrial gray of the deck. A small orange tabby cat wound around her ankles, tail held high like a furry periscope, before darting towards Javier with a questioning meow. Javier nudged the cat, Cheshire, gently with the toe of his boot. Same old song from C7, flirting with the yellow line, never quite crossing it. Pressure sinks are compensating. He tapped the offending readout on the panel. Needs recalibration next cycle, but she'll hold. Samira made a note on her tablet. Biosignatures stable facility-wide. Ambient radiation within standard deviation. Except, she zoomed in on a specific graph. Minor chronoton displacement spikes detected around the core chamber entrance 3 minutes ago. Less than 0.001% variance, but patterned. Javier squinted at her tablet. Patterned was unusual. Random fluctuations were the norm in the quantum froth they barely kept leashed. Patterned how? Repeating triplet sequence. 2 ordered for background noise, 2 faint for system feedback. Samira pushed her glasses up her nose. Probably sensor ghosting again. Diagnostics read clean on the emitters themselves. Cheshire, having decided Javier offered no immediate sustenance, rubbed against the railing, peered down through the grating towards the massive, softly glowing machinery below, then began meticulously grooming a forepaw. The hum seemed to pitch infinitesimally higher. A bank of overhead fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting strobing shadows across the deck. Javier instinctively reached for the emergency comm panel on the wall. Deck lights are strobing. Control. Run a diagnostic on power relay J12. Static answered him. Not the usual carrier signal hiss, but a thick, wet static, like insects scrabbling inside the speaker. Samira frowned, tapping commands onto her tablet. Local comms are offline. Network connection lost. Facility mainframe isn't responding. The deck lights flickered again, faster this time. Then, one by one, they extinguished, plunging the observation deck into near darkness, illuminated only by the emergency strips running along the floor and the eerie, pulsing glow from the QFS core far below. The constant hum deepened, warping into a discordant groan that resonated painfully in their chests. What is happening? Samira's voice held a tremor, a crack in the usual professional calm. Javier grabbed the heavy wrench, its weight a small comfort. Emergency lockdown sounds like, or worse. The air grew strangely cold, raising goosebumps on his arms. He saw Cheshire, frozen mid-lick, fur standing on end, staring intently at a blank section of wall near the main corridor access. The cat let out a low, guttural hiss that wasn't its usual sound. Massive thuds echoed from below, the unmistakable sound of blast doors slamming shut. Red emergency lights began to strobe, bathing the deck in pools in crimson. An automated voice, synthesized and devoid of inflection, crackled from secondary speakers, distorted by the same thick static that plagued the comms. Warning, quantum containment, field instability, detected, level 7 lockdown, initiated, all personnel, proceed, designated safe zones, immediately. The message looped, each repetition degrading further, syllables slurring, words fragmenting. Javier moved towards the main corridor door. It was thick plasteel designed to withstand significant pressure. It remained open. Safe zones are level 3. We need to move. Samira clutched her tablet, her knuckles white. The lifts will be offline. Stairs are 5 levels down. She glanced towards the wall Cheshire was fixated on. The emergency lighting flickered over its surface, and for a fraction of a second, Javier thought he saw something, a stain, a shadow where none should be. It vanished as the light pulsed. "Let's go." Javier gripped the door frame. Cheshire hissed again, a low warning rumble, then bolted not towards the corridor, but dashing along the railing before leaping onto a conduit pipe running along the upper wall, disappearing into the shadows near the ceiling. "Cheshire," Samira called out, taking an involuntary step after the cat. "Leave him," Javier pulled her arm. "He knows this place better than we do. Cat will find a way. We need to get out of the high-energy zone." He peered down the corridor. It stretched ahead, emergency lights casting long, dancing shadows. It looked normal, empty. But the silence felt wrong, the absence of the QFS hum replaced by that deep, groaning vibration and the maddening crackle of the failing alert system. The air itself felt thick, heavy. He took a step into the corridor, Samira close behind. The blast door to the observation deck hissed and began to slide shut behind them, sealing them in. The final thud echoed down the empty passage. The groaning vibration intensified, making the floor plates tremble beneath their boots. Chapter 2: Oscillating Realities. The corridor pulsed red. Emergency lighting strips along the floor and ceiling provided the only illumination, casting their faces in demonic hues. Every 10 seconds, the lights blinked off for a full second, plunging them into absolute blackness before snapping back on. It was disorienting, a rhythmic blindness forcing micro-adjustments in stride. The heavy vibration continued, a physical presence pressing in from all sides. "Main stairwell access should be 2 junctions down, then left," Javier stated, his voice tight. He kept the wrench held ready, though against what, he had no clear idea. Discipline dictated readiness. Instinct screamed that a length of steel was pitifully inadequate. Samira walked close behind, her tablet held up as if its inert screen could ward off the unknown. "My tablet is useless. No signal, no power readings, just static." She tucked it into a deep pocket of her lab coat. "Did you see something back there? On the wall?" Reflection, smudge, stress. Javier listed possibilities, dismissing them too quickly. He had seen something, a fleeting wrongness, but admitting it gave it power. Focus on the root. Second junction, then left. They moved cautiously, boots echoing slightly in the narrow space. The air remained cold, carrying a strange metallic tang, like ozone mixed with something else, something faintly organic and unpleasant. They passed the first junction, another corridor stretching into identical red poolsing darkness. The groaning vibration seemed to lessen fractionally, then returned with renewed intensity. As they approached the second junction, the lights flickered off. The second of darkness stretched. When they snapped back on, the corridor ahead was different. Javier stopped short, Samira bumping into his back. Dios. It wasn't radically altered, yet fundamentally wrong. The walls, moments before smooth plasteel painted regulation gray, were now streaked with dark, wet patches glistening under the red light. A section of the ceiling paneling sagged, dripping a viscous fluid that sizzled faintly where it hit the floor. The metallic tang was stronger here, thick with the coppery scent of blood. The floor itself, Javier's stomach churned. It looked smeared, coated in patches with something dark and granular. "What is this?" Samira whispered, horror lacing her voice. She took an instinctive step back. The lights blinked off again. Complete darkness. The groaning vibration shuddered through the floor. They snapped back on. The corridor was pristine. Smooth gray walls, clean floor, intact ceiling panels. The air smelled faintly of sterile cleaners. Javier stared, his knuckles white on the wrench handle. He exchanged a look with Samira. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Did you?" "I saw it," she confirmed, her voice barely audible. "Blood damage." "Sewer position," Javier muttered, the impossible word falling flat in the red-lit passage. "The lockdown failure. It must have destabilized the local reality fields. We're oscillating, flickering between states." "Between what states?" Samira asked, though the answer hung unspoken between them. One state was the lab they knew, the other was drenched in violence. "We need to keep moving," Javier decided, forcing his legs forward. "Staying here won't help, the stairwell." They reached the junction. He peered left. Red light illuminated the descending steps of the emergency stairwell. It looked normal, clean. He checked the right corridor. Also clean, he hesitated. Which reality held the stairwell? Were both versions accessible? A faint scuttling sound echoed from the right corridor. High-pitched, chitinous. "Left," Javier declared, moving towards the stairwell door. It bore the standard access panel. He swiped his ID card. The light flashed green, a soft click indicating the maglock released. He pushed the heavy door open. Inside, the stairwell was concrete and steel, lit by caged emergency bulbs at longer intervals than the corridor lights. The deep vibration was slightly muffled here, replaced by the echoing drip of water from somewhere above. "Hold up," Samira said, catching his arm. She shone the weak flashlight from her emergency kit onto the top step. A single, partial footprint marked the dusty concrete. It wasn't human. Too many points of contact, ending in sharp, deep impressions. And it was wet, leaving a dark, oily residue. Javier studied the track. From the other, state, bleeding through. Possibly, or maybe something made that track in this state. Samira's voice was grim. The chronoton spikes I registered. Maybe they weren't sensor ghosts. Before Javier could reply, a piercing shriek echoed from the corridor they had just left. It wasn't human, full of agony and rage, abruptly cut off. It was followed by a wet tearing sound. Javier slammed the stairwell door shut, the heavy metal booming in the confined space. He fumbled with the manual locking bolts, sliding thick steel pins into their reinforced housings. Something's here, or sometimes here. In the other state, Samira asked, her back pressed against the cold metal door. Maybe not just in the other state. Javier leaned his forehead against the cool steel, listening. Silence returned, broken only by the water drip and their own ragged breathing. The groaning vibration seemed distant now. Suddenly Cheshire appeared. The cat simply faded into view halfway down the first flight of stairs, sitting calmly, washing its face as if appearing from thin air were perfectly normal. It paused, looked up at them and gave a soft, questioning meow. Cheshire, how did you? Samira started towards the cat. Javier held her back. Careful, is he solid? The cat seemed real enough. Its fur ruffled slightly, its whiskers twitched. It blinked slowly, then turned and trotted down the stairs, disappearing around the first landing bend. Did it phase through the wall? Samira wondered aloud. Or the wall phased around it, Javier countered. The rules are breaking down, Samira. Cause, effect, solid matter. It's all becoming suggestion. He looked down the stairs where the cat had vanished. Did it want us to follow? Or lead us into something worse? She shone her light down the stairs. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating concrete steps descending into darkness. The dripping sound continued, rhythmic and unsettling. No sign of the cat, no sign of anything else. He checked the bolts on the door again. Secure. Stuck between a locked door and whatever made that sound, down seems the only option. Level 3 is still the target. He hefted the wrench. Stay alert. Watch everything, especially the shadows. He took the first step down, the gritty concrete crunching under his boot. Samira followed, her flashlight beam sweeping the walls and steps ahead, searching for anomalies, for footprints, for anything solid in a world threatening to dissolve into nightmare. The dripping continued. Drip, drip, drip. Chapter 3, Peripheral Vision. The stairwell descended into suffocating darkness, broken only by the weak, downward-pointing beam of Samira's flashlight and the occasional caged emergency bulb shedding weak yellow light. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying the damp smell of wet concrete and rust. The rhythmic dripping seemed to echo from multiple locations now, impossible to pinpoint. The deep groaning vibration that had shaken the upper levels was almost gone here, replaced by an unnerving quiet. They moved slowly, deliberately placing each foot. Javier went first, wrench held ready, straining his ears. Samira followed, sweeping the light, her medical training making her catalog potential hazards. Loose steps, patches of slick dampness, rusted railings. Level 4 access door, Javier announced, stopping before a heavy steel door identical to the one above. He shone his own weaker utility light on it. No obvious signs of tampering. No strange footprints. He reached for the handle. Wait, Samira put a hand on his arm. Listen. Javier froze. Beneath the dripping sounds, another noise surfaced. Faint, almost subliminal. A soft, wet shuffling seeming to come from inside the wall beside the door, like something bulky dragging itself through insulation or pipe conduits. They stood motionless, barely breathing. The shuffling continued for a few seconds, seeming to move downwards, parallel to the stairs, then faded. Pipe settling, Javier suggested, unconvinced. Didn't sound like metal, Samira replied quietly. Sounded soft. Javier hesitated, hand hovering over the door handle. Level 4 contained material storage, auxiliary labs. No essential systems, no designated safe zones. No reason to enter unless forced. We stick to the plan. Level 3. He started down the next flight of stairs. Samira lingered for a moment, aiming her light back at the level 4 door, then hurried after him. The stairwell curved, plunging them deeper into the facility's bowels. The emergency bulbs became sparser. They were halfway down the flight towards level 3 when it happened. Samira, sweeping her light ahead, caught movement in the far corner of her vision, down where the stairs met the landing. A flicker of motion, instantly gone. Javier, her voice was sharp with sudden fear. What? He stopped, turning. Down there, on the landing, saw something move. He aimed his light downwards. The concrete landing was empty, littered with dust, a discarded nutrient bar wrapper, nothing else. Where? What did you see? Just movement, a shape, dark, didn't get a clear view. She kept her beam fixed on the landing, like something ducking back around the corner. Javier descended cautiously, Samira staying right behind him, both their lights now focused on the landing and the entrance to the level 3 corridor beyond it. They reached the bottom step. Nothing. He checked the corners, the shadows under the stairwell curve. Empty. Maybe it was just a shadow from the lights flickering, he offered, trying to reassure himself as much as her. The corridor lights on level 3 weren't pulsing red like above. They were off completely, leaving the entrance a black maw. It wasn't a shadow, Samira insisted, her voice low and certain. It was tall, hunched. Javier felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. He stepped towards the level 3 corridor entrance. The air flowing out felt colder than the stairwell, carrying that faint, unpleasant organic tang again, stronger now. He shone his light inside. The beam carved a path through utter darkness, revealing the first few meters of a standard corridor. It looked undamaged, clean. Hello, Javier called out, his voice absorbed by the dark. Anyone here? Bellwether, Tanaka. Only silence answered, and the persistent dripping from the stairwell behind them. He took a tentative step into the corridor. Nothing happened. He swept the light left, then right. Empty. Further down, he could just make out the signs for central control and the primary safe zone access. This is it, he said. Control should have override panels, maybe comms. Samira joined him, standing just inside the doorway, her own light scanning the darkness. I don't like this. That thing I saw. We don't know what you saw, Javier interrupted, keeping his voice firm. Could have been anything, stress, tricks of the light. but the image of the fleeting wrongness on the observation deck wall, the blood-streaked corridor flicker, the non-human footprint they piled up, forming a terrifying possibility. Control is our best bet. He started walking down the corridor, beam cutting ahead. Samira stayed close, watching their backs. The silence was absolute. No hum, no vibration, just the soft scuff of their boots on the floor tiles. They passed several laboratory doors, all closed, dark slits underneath showing no light. Javier tried the handle on one marked quantum biology. Locked. He moved on. As they neared a T-junction, a soft scraping sound came from the corridor to their right. Both froze, lights snapping towards the source. The scraping stopped. Javier, Samira whispered. Stay behind me. He advanced slowly towards the junction, wrench held high. He peered around the corner. The corridor stretched perhaps 20 meters, ending in another closed door. It was empty, but halfway down, lying near the wall, was a single object, a standard-issue security headset, cracked and twisted. A dark smear stained the wall beside it. He shone his light on the smear, dark brown, almost black and flacking slightly at the edges. Dried blood. Suddenly a clatter echoed from behind them, back the way they had come. They spun around, light stabbing into the darkness. Nothing. Did you hear? Samira breathed. Sounded like something metal falling. Javier backed away from the junction, pulling Samira with him, retreating towards the main corridor path leading to central control. Whatever is here, it's playing with us, or hunting. They moved faster now, urgency overriding caution. They passed another intersection. Again, movement flickered at the edge of Javier's vision, down the left passage this time. He snapped his head around. Gone. Just empty corridor. But the feeling lingered, a tall, hunched shape dissolving into shadow the moment he tried to focus on it. It's only there when you don't look directly at it, Samira realized, her voice tight with dawning horror. The observer effect, like Schrödinger's cat, but it's not in a box, Javier finished grimly. It's in here with us, and looking at it might be what makes it real, or looking away. They reached the double doors labeled Central Control. Unlike the others, these had power. A small green light glowed beside the access panel. Javier swiped his card. The light turned amber, then red. Access denied. What? My clearance is Omega level. He tried again. Red. Samira swiped her card. Red. Someone's locked us out, she stated unnecessarily. Or the system is too corrupted. Javier slammed his fist against the unyielding metal. Damn it, now what? From the corridor behind them, a soft, dragging shuffle began, punctuated by a wet, clicking sound. It was closer this time, much closer. They aimed their lights down the corridor, beams trembling slightly. The darkness remained absolute, but the sounds advanced steadily. Shuffle, click, drag. Back door, Javier hissed, pointing to a smaller, unmarked service hatch set low in the wall beside the main control doors. It should lead to the maintenance conduit behind the control room systems. He scrambled towards it, prying at the recessed handle. It was stiff, rusted slightly. Samira kept her light aimed down the corridor, listening to the approaching horror. Shuffle, click, drag, getting louder. The hatch popped open with a screech of protesting metal, revealing a dark, narrow crawl space filled with thick cables and pipes. Dust motes danced in Samira's beam. "Go," Javier urged, holding the hatch open. Samira hesitated, glancing back at the impenetrable darkness where the shuffling noise originated, now seeming almost upon them. She ducked and squeezed into the cramped space. Javier threw the wrench in after her, then scrambled inside, pulling the heavy hatch closed just as a large, indistinct shape blotted out the light from the corridor entrance. The hatch clicked shut, plunging them into the claustrophobic dark of the conduit, the terrifying sounds momentarily muffled. They lay there, breathing heavily in the dust-filled blackness, listening to something scrape and click against the other side of the thin metal hatch. Chapter 4: Echoes in the Static. The darkness inside the maintenance conduit was absolute, thick with the smell of dust, old insulation, and metallic decay. Javier lay pressed against the cold metal floor, the hard shapes of bundled cables digging into his back. Samira breathed shallowly beside him, her presence a small point of warmth in the oppressive black. Outside the thin steel hatch, the scraping and clicking continued for several agonizing seconds, seeming to probe the metal barrier before slowly receding down the main corridor. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic thumping of their own hearts and the distant, rhythmic drip from the stairwell they'd left behind. Javier waited, counting seconds that stretched into minutes. He strained his ears, listening for any hint of the thing's return. Nothing. He fumbled beside him, fingers closing around the familiar grip of the wrench he'd tossed in. "Think it's gone," Samira whispered, her voice tight and close in the confined space. "Gone where or gone when?" Javier shifted, trying to get into a sitting position without dislodging cascades of ancient dust. His shoulder brushed against a thick conduit pipe coated in something faintly sticky. This place, the rules are shot, could be standing right outside, just out of phase. He located his utility light, clicking it on. The beam was weak, illuminating a suffocatingly narrow tunnel crammed with pipes, wires, and junction boxes. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed by their entry. Samira activated her own stronger beam, sweeping it around. The conduit stretched ahead, turning a corner after a few meters. Cables, thick as a man's arm, snaked along the walls and ceiling, secured by rusting clamps. Some conduits were labeled with faded stencils: PWR Core AUX, Data Main C3, YNVRECYC. This conduit should run parallel to the main control room spine, Javier said, consulting a mental map of the facility's guts. There might be an access panel further down behind the main consoles. He pointed the weak beam ahead. Only one way to find out. He started crawling forward, the wrench bumping against his thigh. The space was barely wide enough for his shoulders, forcing him to hunch low. Samira followed, her light beam playing over his back and scanning the space above and behind them. Progress was slow, hampered by crosspipes and sagging bundles of wires they had to squeeze under or around. The air was stagnant, choked with dust that rasped in their throats. After navigating the first bend, they found evidence of the facility's instability bleeding even into these hidden spaces. A section of the conduit wall, normally solid plasteel, flickered intermittently. For fractions of a second, it would become transparent, offering horrifying glimpses into the main control room beyond. Flashing red emergency lights, overturned chairs, equipment consoles smashed and dark. Then it would snap back to solid gray steel. Dios, Javier breathed, watching a console shatter in one flicker, only to be pristine milliseconds later. The superposition is pervasive. The instability isn't just affecting empty space, it's affecting matter integrity, Samira observed, her voice strained. The whole facility structure might be compromised, oscillating between intact and destroyed. Further along, a thick power cable, labeled Stabilizer Matrix C7 feed, spasmed violently where it emerged from a junction box. Bright blue sparks erupted from a frayed section of insulation, showering the narrow space with incandescent particles that vanished before hitting the floor. The acrid smell of ozone filled the air. C7, Javier muttered, the one that was showing variance. He eyed the sparking cable warily. Have to get past it, stay low, hug the far wall. He squeezed past the hazardous cable, feeling the static charge prickle his skin. Samira followed cautiously, averting her face as another shower of sparks erupted. Just beyond the sparking cable, lying in the thick dust, was a small, desiccated shape. Samira aimed her light at it. A rat, twisted into an unnatural posture, its teeth bared in a final rictus, its body oddly flattened and elongated, as if squeezed through a space too small even for its bones. Samira swallowed hard. Quantum effects on biology, severe spatial distortion. Javier didn't respond, pushing forward. He wanted out of this cramped, dusty tomb. They continued crawling, the only sounds their own movements and the distant, maddening drip. The silence from the main corridor felt precarious, temporary. Suddenly, a soft meow echoed from ahead, seemingly just around the next bend. Cheshire, Samira called softly, relief and suspicion mingling in her tone. Javier paused, listening. The meow came again, closer this time. He crawled forward, rounding the bend. His light beam fell upon the orange tabby cat. Cheshire sat calmly in the middle of the conduit, meticulously washing a paw, seemingly unfazed by the dust, the darkness, or the sparking cables. It blinked slowly at Javier's light, then gave another soft meow, turning its head to look pointedly at a large ventilation grate set into the side wall of the conduit. The ventilation system, Javier realized. It might bypass the locked control access. He crawled towards the grate. It was secured with standard bolts. Cheshire watched him approach, then, with a final flick of its tail, faded. Not quickly, but like smoke dissipating, leaving only undisturbed dust where it had been sitting moments before. Samira reached the bend, her light joining Javier's on the empty space. "Did you see?" "Yeah," Javier confirmed grimly. "He was here, now he's not, just like the corridor states." He turned his attention to the grate, examining the bolts. Old type, might be able to force them with the wrench. He positioned the tool's claw around the first bolt head. "Let's hope the ventilation shafts aren't compromised too." He threw his weight against the wrench. Metal screeched in protest, echoing loudly in the confined space. He froze, listening. No answering shuffle, no clicks from the main corridor. Only the drip, drip, drip from the stairwell, a persistent, watery heartbeat in the damaged facility. He set his jaw and applied pressure again. The bolt groaned, then began to turn. Chapter 5: Corrupted Memory. The bolts surrendered one by one, screeching in protest, the sound magnified in the narrow conduit. Javier worked quickly, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill air, casting anxious glances back the way they had come. Each metallic groan felt like an invitation. Finally, the last bolt came free. He pulled the heavy metal grate inwards, revealing a square opening leading into pitch blackness that smelled of mildew and recycled air. Ventilation shaft, Javier confirmed, shining his light inside. It was wider than the maintenance conduit, roughly square, sheet metal walls coated in dust. It appeared to lead horizontally, presumably connecting various rooms on this level for air circulation. Should run above the main consoles in control. Might be another access grate further down. He slid the wrench into the shaft first, then hoisted himself up and through the opening. Samira handed him her flashlight before following, squeezing through the aperture. Javier pulled the conduit grate closed behind them, though the loose bolts offered no real security. Inside the vent shaft, the world was resonating metal. Every movement, every breath echoed slightly. The distant dripping was muffled here, but the silence felt different, hollow, expectant. Javier took the lead again, crawling forward on hands and knees, Samira's stronger beam illuminating the way. They crawled for perhaps 30 meters, the shaft angling slightly downwards. They passed several smaller ducts branching off, likely leading to individual offices or labs. Javier ignored them, focused on where he estimated central control should be. The air remained still, stagnant. Then ahead, light. A faint, flickering luminescence spilled from an opening in the shaft floor. Javier approached cautiously, signaling for quiet. He peered down through another ventilation grate. Below them lay central control, or what remained of it in this particular quantum state. Emergency lighting pulsed erratically, sometimes red, sometimes failing white strobes, sometimes plunging the room into near total darkness save for the sparks showering from damaged consoles. Chairs were overturned, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Several large monitoring screens dominating the far wall were cracked, displaying only static or fragmented, nonsensical data streams. The deep hum of powerful machinery was absent, replaced by the crackle of failing electronics, and a low, intermittent moan that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. There was no sign of personnel, no bodies, no movement, just chaos and ruin flickering in and out of stability. "See any access panels, anything we can use?" Samira whispered, peering down beside him. Javier scanned the room below. Main command console seems partially active, flickering, but maybe. He pointed towards the center of the room. There's a floor-level service hatch near the base of that console, same type as the conduit access, if we can reach it without attracting whatever hunted the corridors. They watched the room cycle through its flickering states. In one pulse of red light, the room seemed intact, screens showing normal diagnostic patterns, chairs upright. Then, darkness, followed by the sparks and destruction, a horrifying loop of potentiality. "We wait for an intact phase," Samira suggested. "Too risky," Javier countered. The phases aren't stable, could switch back while we're exposed. Better to move during a destruction phase. Less chance of active sensors picking us up, maybe. He braced himself. On the next dark cycle after the sparks, we drop, move fast for the hatch. They waited, red pulse, white strobe, sparks showered from a console, darkness. Now, Javier pushed the grate open. It swung downwards on rusted hinges and dropped the 2 meters to the floor below, landing hard but rolling to absorb the impact. Samira followed instantly, landing more lightly beside him. They scrambled towards the central console bank, keeping low, the floor gritty with debris under their boots. They reached the console just as the red emergency lights flickered back on, bathing the wrecked room in crimson. Javier located the service hatch near the floor, embedded in the console's base. He tugged at the handle, locked electronically. Damn it, need power or an override. He scanned the console above him. Sections were dark, others displayed fractured error messages scrolling too fast to read. One smaller touchscreen near the edge flickered intermittently, showing a facility schematic before dissolving into static. Samira tapped frantically at the touchscreen during a moment of clarity, trying to access local diagnostics. Maybe reroute auxiliary power to this hatch. The screen blinked, displaying a command prompt for a nanosecond before reverting to static. System memory is corrupted, fragmented. Javier ran his hand along the console's edge, feeling for a manual release. His fingers brushed against a small, recessed port. Emergency data port. If I can interface my utility tool. He fished a battered multi-tool from his belt pouch, selecting a data spike attachment. As he tried to insert the spike, the main screens on the far wall suddenly flared. Not with static, but with distorted images. Security footage, timestamped just before the lockdown. It showed researchers panicking, alarms flashing. Then the image warped, colors bleeding, figures stretching impossibly. A tall, hunched shape appeared in the corner of one frame, indistinct like a glitch in the recording itself. It seemed to vibrate at the edge of perception. The timestamp dissolved into random characters. "What is that?" Samira breathed, staring at the flickering horror on the screen. Suddenly, the image snapped to a live feed, or what passed for live in their unstable reality. It showed the corridor outside central control, the one they'd just escaped. Empty, dark. But the audio pickup hissed with the faint sound of shuffling, clicking, dragging, seeming to approach the main doors again. Then the view shifted. It cycled rapidly through other cameras in the facility. The observation deck flickering between pristine and damaged states. The stairwell empty save for the endless drip. A laboratory filled with shattered glassware. Another corridor utterly black. Then, disconcertingly, it showed the inside of the ventilation shaft they had just exited, the view shaky, as if filmed by something small hiding in the darkness. Cheshire. The screen showing the corridor outside control flickered again. A shape resolved dimly in the darkness near the main doors. Tall, hunched, featureless. It wasn't moving, just standing there, as if waiting, or watching. "It knows we're here," Javier said, his voice low. He jammed the data spike into the port. The small touchscreen beside him lit up, displaying corrupted code scrolling rapidly. Trying to bypass the lock. Sparks showered from the ceiling directly above them. A heavy piece of ceiling tile crashed to the floor nearby. The lights flickered violently, plunging them into darkness for longer than before. The low moaning sound from the walls intensified, rising in pitch to an almost unbearable groan. In the returning red pulse of light, Samira pointed at the main screens again. The image of the corridor outside was gone, replaced by static, but the feed showing the inside of the vent shaft remained, now showing the dark, empty space. And faintly just visible at the edge of the frame, two tiny points of reflected light. Eyes, watching. Something was in the vents with them, or had been. Javier, the hatch, Samira urged, glancing nervously upwards towards the vent opening they'd used. The touchscreen flared green. Access granted. The service hatch beside Javier clicked open. He pulled it wide, revealing another cramped space filled with wiring harnesses and glowing fiber optic nodes. Get in. He pushed Samira towards the opening. As she scrambled inside, the main lights in control died completely, leaving only the random sparking of damaged consoles. The heavy double doors leading to the main corridor began to buckle inwards with a screech of tortured metal, as if immense pressure were being applied from the other side. Something vast and unseen was trying to force its way in. Chapter 6: Unstable Ground. Javier scrambled into the service space after Samira, yanking the small hatch shut behind him. It offered little resistance against the immense force assaulting the main control room doors, but it was a barrier, however thin. The horrifying sounds of groaning, buckling metal from the control room were slightly muffled, replaced by the close, humming thrum of active fiber optics, and the near-silent rush of air from small cooling fans within the console's core. This space was even tighter than the main conduit, a vertical shaft packed with delicate electronic components and neatly bundled wires. Small indicator lights blinked rhythmically on various modules, casting shifting patterns of green, amber, and blue in the otherwise total darkness. It smelled of hot electronics and filtered air. "Where does this go?" Samira asked, her voice trembling slightly. She braced herself against a bundle of fiber optics as the entire console structure shuddered violently, coinciding with a tremendous boom from the control room, the main doors finally giving way. "Should be vertical access," Javier replied, shining his utility light upwards and downwards. Below, the shaft descended into darkness. Above, it continued upwards, presumably connecting to other system cores or junction points. Connects the main processing units. Maybe access to Level 2 systems. "Level 2?" Samira questioned. "Isn't that mostly administrative, offices, conference rooms?" "And the primary server archive," Javier clarified. "If the mainframe connection is severed facility-wide, the archive might hold core data, original diagnostic logs from before. This." He shone the light upwards again. "Worth a try. Better than waiting here for that thing to figure out this hatch." Another shudder vibrated through the console. He found recessed handholds and footholds built into the shaft wall, clearly designed for maintenance access. "Stay sharp. Keep the light moving." He began to climb, the wrench secured through a loop on his belt. The climb was tense. Every few meters, the shaft shuddered, accompanied by distant crashes or groans from the facility beyond. The indicator lights flickered occasionally, their steady rhythm momentarily disrupted, mirroring the larger instability. They passed several horizontal conduits branching off, but Javier ignored them, focused on reaching the level 2 access point indicated by faded stenciling beside a sealed junction box. After climbing perhaps 10 meters, they reached a wider section where the shaft opened onto a small maintenance platform. Another service hatch, identical to the one below, was set into the wall here, labeled LVL2 Archive SYS Access. Javier dropped onto the platform, catching his breath. He helped Samira down. They listened. The noises from level 3 seemed more distant here. A low, steady hum replaced the chaotic crackling, the sound of the server banks, hopefully still operational. He tried the hatch, locked electronically. Again, he sighed, pulling out his multi-tool. Hope this works twice. He found the emergency data port beside the handle. As he worked, Samira swept her light around the small platform. It was clean, dusty, but undisturbed, except for one corner. Tucked behind a thick power conduit, almost hidden, was a crumpled lab coat. It was Samira's size. Splattered across the front were dark, dried stains. Samira gasped softly, directing Javier's attention with her light beam. He paused his work on the hatch, looking at the coat. He recognized the departmental insignia, quantum biology. Dr. Aris Thorne's team worked primarily on level 3, Samira said quietly. But they sometimes used the simulation suites connected to the archive server. Javier nudged the coat with his boot. A standard issue data slate tumbled out of the pocket, its screen cracked. He picked it up. The power cell was dead. Maybe the archive has security logs for this level. He returned to the hatch, inserting the data spike. The mechanism clicked. The hatch sprang open slightly. He pulled it open, revealing not a continuation of the service shaft, but a short, narrow passage leading directly into the server archive room. Cool, dry air flowed out, carrying the clean electronic smell of heavily filtered systems. Rows upon rows of tall server racks filled the room beyond, indicator lights blinking in hypnotic arrays. The room was lit by standard, steady fluorescent lighting. It seemed blessedly normal, untouched by the flickering chaos below. Looks clear, Javier said, peering inside. Stable. They stepped through the hatch into the archive room. Compared to the pulsing emergency lights and damaged corridors, the steady hum and consistent lighting felt almost surreal. Banks of servers stretched away into the distance, forming long, narrow aisles. Samira went immediately to a nearby terminal built into the end of one rack. She tapped the screen. It sprang to life, requesting access credentials. She entered hers. Access granted. Network connection is localized, but the archive core seems operational. Let's see. Her fingers flew across the virtual keyboard. Trying security logs first, time-stamped around the initial incident. Javier kept watch, standing near the hatch, listening intently. The steady hum of the servers was the only sound, too quiet. He walked slowly down the nearest aisle, his boots silent on the polished anti-static flooring, sweeping his light beam into the shadowed gaps between the towering racks. Nothing. Got something, Samira called out. Video log, corridor outside simulation suite 2B timestamp matches the initial level 7 alert. Javier hurried back to the terminal. Samira tapped the screen. A video window popped up. It showed a clean, brightly lit corridor on level 2, empty at first. Then a side door opened, and a researcher stumbled out. Javier recognized Kenji Tanaka, the junior researcher, looking pale and disoriented. He leaned against the wall, clutching his head. Seconds later, alarms blared, the lights flickered violently, then shifted to pulsing red. Tanaka looked around wildly, then sprinted down the corridor, disappearing from view. The log ended abruptly as the timestamp dissolved into garbage characters. He was on this level when it started, Javier observed. Maybe he made it to a safe zone. Or maybe, Samira trailed off, typing furiously. Trying to access his personnel logs, cross-reference with life sign monitors before the network failed. The screen filled with scrolling code, then an error message. Data corrupted or inaccessible. She slammed her hand lightly on the console. Useless. She pulled up another file. Diagnostic logs from the stabilizer core moments before the cascade failure. Graphs and equations filled the screen. Samira scanned them quickly, her expression growing increasingly grim. This wasn't just a containment breach, Javier. Look at these energy readings, the chronoton displacement values. They didn't just spike, they inverted. The field reversed polarity for a fraction of a second. Inverted, what does that mean? It means instead of containing the quantum foam, stabilizing probabilities. For an instant, it might have actively destabilized reality, pushed uncertainty outwards. It might have created the superposition state, not just failed to prevent it. She zoomed in on a complex equation. This feedback loop, it wasn't accidental system failure. It looks almost deliberate, like the core was fed specific resonant frequencies. Sabotage, Javier frowned. Who? Before Samira could answer, a low chime echoed through the server room. Not an alarm, but a soft, melodic tone. It repeated. Both looked around, trying to locate the source. What's that? Javier asked. Unfamiliar signal, Samira replied, checking her terminal. Not a system alert. The chime sounded again, closer this time. It seemed to come from deeper within the server aisles. Then another sound joined it, a soft, rhythmic purring. Javier raised the wrench, exchanging a wary look with Samira. He started moving cautiously down the main aisle towards the source of the sounds. Samira stayed at the terminal, trying to isolate the signal source on the facility schematic. He turned down a side aisle, moving between two rows of humming servers. The chime sounded again, right at the end of this aisle, and the purring. He reached the end, peered around the corner, and stopped. Cheshire sat beside a large floor access panel, the type leading to subfloor cabling. The cat was looking down at the panel, purring loudly, and next to the cat, lying on the floor, was a small, sleek black device emitting the soft, repeating chime. A personal locator beacon. Active. As Javier watched, Cheshire lifted a paw and tapped the beacon gently. The chime stopped. The cat looked up at Javier, blinked slowly, then began grooming itself, the purr rumbling in its chest. Javier approached slowly. He recognized the beacon type, issued to senior staff and emergency response teams. He knelt beside it. Engraved on the side was a name, Mbellwether, head of security. Samira, Javier called back, keeping his voice low. Found Bellwether's beacon, it's active, and the cat. Samira appeared at the end of the aisle. Bellwether is he. Javier shone his light on the floor panel beside the beacon. There were faint scratches near the edge and what looked like finger marks in the dust, leading under the panel's recessed handle. Someone had opened this recently, or tried to. He reached for the handle. As his fingers brushed the cool metal, the floor beneath his feet shifted. Not a vibration, but a lurch, like the entire section of flooring momentarily lost its solidity. He stumbled back, catching himself against a server rack. The server rack itself seemed to shimmer for a split second, its hard edges blurring. "Instability field," Samira yelled, grabbing his arm and pulling him back down the aisle. "It's localized here. The archive isn't stable after all." The lights in the server room flickered violently, plunging them into the familiar, terrifying strobe effect darkness, then harsh fluorescent glare. In one flash of light, the floor panel Cheshire sat beside looked warped, buckled upwards. In the next flash, it was smooth and normal. Cheshire remained beside it, unperturbed, still grooming. The entire server room groaned, a deep metallic stress sound. Several server racks tilted precariously. Indicator lights flashed chaotically. The steady hum became a discordant whine. The ground felt fundamentally unreliable beneath their feet. They needed to move. But where? Back to the compromised service shaft, or risk opening that floor panel, following Bellwether's beacon into whatever lay below. Chapter 7: Subfloor Descent. The server room lights pulsed harsh glare, then blackness mirroring the frantic beat of Javier's heart. The floor beneath the access panel shimmered again, buckling momentarily like stressed plastic before snapping back to solidity. Server racks groaned around them. Dust sifted from the ceiling tiles. Cheshire, perched beside the floor panel and Bellwether's beacon, remained unnervingly calm, tail twitching slightly. "We can't stay here," Samira shouted over the rising whine of failing server fans. She grabbed Javier's arm, pulling him away from the unstable section of floor. "The whole archive is coming apart." Javier looked back at the service hatch leading to the vertical shaft, their only known escape route. Then he looked at the floor panel, the beacon, the cat. Bellwether was down there, maybe alive, maybe with answers. Retreat meant abandoning a potential ally and any information he might possess. Going forward meant stepping directly onto the most unstable ground they had yet encountered, into an unknown space, chasing a beacon signal that could easily be a trap or a phantom echo. The lights strobed violently. During a flash of stark white light, Javier saw the far wall of the server room ripple, large sections of the metal seeming to liquefy for an instant before reforming. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. "No choice," Javier yelled back. "The shaft might collapse before we reach it. Bellwether might know another way out." He pushed past Samira, moving quickly towards the floor panel during a brief moment of relative stability. "Cover me." Samira nodded grimly, raising her flashlight and aiming it back towards the service hatch. Watching for any threats emerging from the shaft or the archive room itself. Javier knelt beside the floor panel, ignoring the slight vibration under his knees. He gripped the recessed handle. Cheshire looked up at him, let out a soft chirp, then deliberately nudged the locator beacon with its nose, pushing it closer to the panel's edge. Javier took a deep breath and pulled. The panel lifted with surprising ease, heavy but balanced on hidden counterweights. Cool, damp air, smelling strongly of earth and stagnant water, wafted up from the opening. He shone his utility light down. It wasn't a maintenance crawl space. It was a deeper cavity, the true subfloor beneath the archive's raised structural plating. Thick bundles of primary data conduits and coolant pipes crisscrossed the space below, suspended from the archive floor's underside like metallic vines. The actual foundation floor was another 2 meters below the pipes, uneven concrete slick with moisture. There was no ladder. "Bellwether," Javier called down, his voice echoing slightly in the space. Only the drip, drip, drip of water answered, louder here than in the stairwell, suggesting significant water ingress. And another sound barely audible, a low, pained groan seemingly human. "He's down there." Javier shone his light around the opening's edge. "Must have dropped." He quickly unclipped the heavy wrench from his belt, then started pulling coiled comms cable from an exposed bundle running near the opening. "Need to rig a descent line." "Javier, hurry," Samira warned, her light beam flickering nervously across the server racks. "The instability is getting worse." Indeed, a nearby server rack suddenly tilted further, sparks cascading from its upper section as it tore free from its ceiling mount. Javier worked rapidly, anchoring the thick cable around a solid stanchion supporting the raised floor, testing the knot with his full weight. He looped the other end under his arms. "Okay, going down. Lower the lights and the wrench when I call for them." He swung his legs into the opening and began carefully lowering himself, bracing his boots against the tangled pipes and conduits. The descent was awkward, pipes shifting under his weight, the damp air chilling him. Below, the concrete floor was uneven, partially flooded in sections. As his feet touched the slick surface, he scanned the immediate area with his headlamp. Dark stains marred the concrete nearby, more dried blood. A discarded security sidearm lay half-submerged in a puddle a few meters away. "Samira, lights," he called up softly. She carefully lowered her powerful flashlight on a length of thinner wire, followed by the wrench. Javier caught them, clipping the flashlight to his belt and securing the wrench. He swept the stronger beam around the subfloor space. Pipes dripped constantly. Water pooled in low areas. The walls were rough foundation concrete, streaked with dampness and patches of efflorescence. And slumped against a large coolant pipe manifold 20 meters away, partially obscured by shadows, was a figure. "Bellwether," Javier started towards the figure, moving cautiously across the uneven, slick ground. "Marcus, you okay?" The figure stirred, lifting a head. Even in the dim light, Javier could see the haggard face, the torn uniform, the unnatural stiffness of one arm held across the man's chest. It was Marcus Bellwether, the facility's security chief. "Reyes," Bellwether's voice was rough, strained. Keep your light low, don't look right at the corners." Javier approached, stopping a few meters away. "What happened to you? Your arm. Compound fracture, Bellwether grunted, pain tightening his features. Floor panel gave way during a flicker, long drop. He gestured vaguely with his good hand. This whole level, foundations compromised, unstable pockets. Samira called down from the opening above. Javier, what's down there? Is he all right? Found him, Javier called back. He's injured, bad break in his arm. Can you see if there's a first aid kit in any of those server cabinets? He turned back to Bellwether. We need to get you out of here. Easier said than done, Bellwether rasped. He tried to shift his position and grimaced, sweat beading on his forehead. Something else. Down here, Reyes stalking. The flickering thing, tall hunched, Javier asked, keeping his voice low. Bellwether nodded slowly. Saw it. In the reflections, in the puddles, moves when you're not watching, came after me when I fell, broke my arm, trying to crawl away. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. It feeds on attention. Observation collapses it into something solid, something fast. Javier swept his light beam in a slow arc, deliberately avoiding looking directly into the deepest shadows or corners. The dripping water seemed to coalesce into unsettling shapes in his peripheral vision. We saw it on level 3, outside control. It's learning, Bellwether stated, his eyes darting nervously towards a dark alcove formed by intersecting pipes. Adapting, use the calm static, to whisper, tries to make you look. Suddenly, Cheshire dropped silently from the opening above, landing gracefully on a wide pipe near Bellwether. The cat regarded the injured man, then looked towards the dark alcove Bellwether kept glancing at, letting out a low, almost inaudible growl. Damn cat, Bellwether muttered, kept showing up, distraction or warning can't tell. Samira's voice came from above. Found a basic trauma kit, lowering it now. A small white box descended on the wire. Javier caught the kit. Samira, stay up there, watch the opening, let us know if anything changes. He moved to Bellwether's side, opening the kit. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, painkillers, a collapsible splint. Basic, but better than nothing. All right, Marcus, let's see that arm. As Javier knelt to examine the injury, the section of concrete floor directly between him and the dark alcove Bellwether feared began to shimmer. The wet surface rippled, not like water but like reality itself losing cohesion. The shimmering intensified, resolving into a patch of utter blackness, deeper than shadow, absorbing the light from Javier's headlamp. It expanded rapidly, silently, flowing across the floor towards them. And from within that void, something began to uncoil. Chapter 8: Whispers in the Periphery. The patch of absolute blackness flowed across the slick concrete like spilled ink, consuming the light, silent and swift. It spread from the alcove Bellwether feared, coalescing directly in their path. Javier instinctively pulled back from Bellwether's injured arm, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground. Cheshire, perched on the pipe above, arched its back, fur on end, letting out a sharp hiss directed at the encroaching void. Don't stare at it, Bellwether gasped, gritting his teeth against a wave of pain from his arm. Peripheral. Only look peripheral. It was instinct to fixate on the threat, but Javier forced his gaze away, focusing instead on Bellwether's pale face, on Samira's tense silhouette framed in the opening high above, on the dripping pipes, anywhere but directly at the expanding anomaly. Yet in the corner of his eye he saw it. The blackness wasn't just flat. It had depth, a roiling texture like smoke or shifting static. And something was uncoiling within it, a suggestion of limbs, of a hunched posture, momentarily resolving before dissolving back into the void as his peripheral attention wavered. The observation horror, manifesting not from shadow, but from a tear in reality itself. Samira, status. Javier yelled upwards, his voice tight. Archive still unstable, lights flickering, that thing outside control on level 3. The camera feed showed it trying the service shaft hatch. Samira's voice was strained with fear. It knows where we went. Trapped, an unstable room above, an actively manifesting horror before them and potentially another path blocked soon. Javier's mind raced. Bellwether couldn't move quickly with his arm shattered. Fighting the entity seemed impossible. Its nature defied direct confrontation. The core stabilizers. Samira's voice crackled slightly from above, interference bleeding through. The inversion frequency. Bellwether, did you find anything about who triggered it? Bellwether groaned, clutching his broken arm. No proof, suspicions, Dr. Lee, head theoretical. He was obsessed with breaching the plank barrier, not just observing foam. Argued with Director Fuentes constantly. Said true understanding required. Interaction. He coughed again. Had access codes, override privileges. Jian Lee, the obsessive lead physicist. Sabotage. Javier shook his head. Motive seemed thin, the risk astronomical. Unless Lee hadn't intended this level of catastrophe. A miscalculation amplified by the facility's inherent quantum instability. The void on the floor stopped spreading, perhaps 10 meters away. It pulsed subtly. The hunched shape within writhed, never quite settling into focus as long as Javier kept his gaze averted. But a sound began to emanate from it, not a voice, but a psychic pressure, a mental static that scraped at the edges of his thoughts. It formed phantom whispers, distorted echoes of their own fears. Lost, trapped, dissolve, give in, look. It's trying to draw focus, Javier realized, using psychological pressure. He fumbled in the first aid kit, finding a syringe of potent painkiller. Marcus, need to manage this pain. Then we figure a way out. Bellwether nodded weakly. There's another way, deeper access tunnel, leads towards auxiliary control, west quadrant. He gestured vaguely with his good hand further into the darkness behind him. Used it when that thing cornered me. Javier administered the injection, then quickly began assembling the collapsible splint around Bellwether's mangled forearm, securing it tightly with bandages. Bellwether hissed in pain but didn't cry out, his military discipline holding firm even now. Auxiliary control, Samira's voice queried from above. That's near the old hydroprocessing sector, mostly offline for years. Still has environmental system links, Bellwether managed, his breathing evening slightly as the painkiller took effect. And maybe seismic sensors, need to see if the whole facility structure is failing. The void pulsed again. The mental static intensified. Look at me. See your end. Unraveling. Join the pattern. Javier felt a strong urge to turn to face the anomaly to understand its impossible geometry. He clenched his jaw, fighting the psychic lure. He finished securing the splint. "Okay, Marcus, can you walk leaning on me?" "Try," Bellwether grunted. Javier helped the security chief slowly to his feet. Bellwether leaned heavily on Javier's shoulder, his face contorted but resolute. Cheshire watched them, then hopped down from the pipe, landing silently on the wet concrete. The cat moved towards the area Bellwether indicated, pausing near a section of blank foundation wall almost hidden behind a tangle of conduits. It scratched lightly at the concrete. "The access panel," Bellwether confirmed. "Hidden release, behind that junction box." Javier guided Bellwether slowly towards the wall, keeping his eyes resolutely fixed on their path, on the dripping pipes, on the cat, anywhere but the pulsing void that he could feel, sense, almost hear gathering itself in the space behind them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "So cold, fatting, inevitable, just look." Samira's frantic voice echoed from above. "Javier, something's coming up the shaft, metallic scraping, fast." Javier reached the wall, fumbling behind the indicated junction box. His fingers found a recessed lever. He pulled it. With a faint grinding sound, a section of the concrete wall slid inwards, revealing a low, dark tunnel entrance. It smelled of damp earth and rust. "Go get him through," Javier urged Bellwether. Bellwether stumbled into the tunnel opening. Cheshire darted in after him. Javier turned, grabbing the flashlight Samira had lowered, ready to follow. He risked a fractional glance back towards the void. The blackness had receded slightly, but the shape within was more defined now, coalescing rapidly. Tall, impossibly thin limbs, a hunched back, a featureless head that seemed to drink the light. It took a staggering step towards them, its movement jerky, unnatural, like a marionette controlled by unseen quantum strings. The whispers ceased, replaced by a low, guttural clicking sound that vibrated in Javier's bones. It was solidifying. It was coming. "Samira, get down here now," Javier yelled, aiming the flashlight beam directly at the opening above. "No time. Jump." He backed into the hidden tunnel entrance, holding the beam steady for her, praying she wouldn't hesitate. Above, outlined against the flickering chaos of the server room, Samira launched herself into the darkness. Chapter 9: Fractured Passage. Samira landed hard on the slick concrete subfloor, knees buckling but staying upright. The impact jarred her teeth. Instantly, Javier grabbed her arm, pulling her backwards into the narrow tunnel entrance just as the observation horror lunged across the subfloor space. Its movement was unnervingly fast now, a fluid distortion that warped the air around it. It reached the spot where they had stood moments before, its featureless head sweeping the area. "The panel!" Javier shouted, fumbling beside the tunnel opening for a closing mechanism. His fingers found another recessed lever. He shoved it downwards. The hidden concrete door began to slide shut with a low, grinding sound, agonizingly slow. The horror turned towards the closing gap. It didn't rush but flowed towards them, its form flickering slightly, threatening to decoalesce if they looked away, yet terrifyingly solid as it advanced. The gap narrowed. 10 centimeters. 5. 2. With a final heavy groan, the concrete panel sealed shut, plunging the tunnel into absolute darkness and cutting off the sight of the entity. Silence, except for their ragged breathing and the ever-present dripping from somewhere deeper within. Javier slumped against the newly sealed door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He flicked on his utility light. Samira simultaneously activated her stronger beam. They were in a low, rough-hewn tunnel, barely tall enough to stand upright. Old support beams, slick with dampness, lined the walls at intervals. The floor was uneven earth and gravel, sloping gently downwards. Bellwether leaned heavily against the tunnel wall nearby, cradling his splinted arm, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Cheshire sat at his feet, calmly washing a paw. "Is it gone?" Samira asked, her voice shaky, aiming her light back at the sealed panel. "Sealed," Javier confirmed. "For now, but that thing, it seemed different, more solid, faster." "It's adapting," Bellwether rasped. "Or the rules are breaking down further. Observation might not be the only trigger anymore." He pushed himself weakly away from the wall. "This tunnel bypasses the main foundation structure. Old access for geological surveys before the facility was fully built should lead west towards auxiliary control," Javier recalled. "Let's move. We don't know if that door will hold or if the horror can phase through." He took the lead, sweeping his light ahead. The tunnel was cramped, twisting unpredictably. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth, minerals, and decay. Water seeped from cracks in the rock walls, pooling on the floor, forcing them to tread carefully. They moved in silence for several minutes, the only sounds their footsteps, Bellwether's occasional pained grunt, and the constant dripping. After rounding a sharp bend, the tunnel opened slightly into a small, cave-like chamber. Old, rusted pipes ran along one wall, disappearing into the rock. In the center of the chamber, the ground changed. The earthy floor gave way to smooth, dark material, almost like obsidian, stretching across their path for several meters before reverting to gravel and earth on the far side. It shimmered faintly, like heat haze, though the air remained cold. Javier stopped, aiming his light at the strange patch. "What is this?" Samira approached cautiously, kneeling near the edge. "Doesn't look like any construction material I recognize. No seams, almost vitreous." She hesitated to touch it. Could it be a geological formation, or something else? Bellwether peered at it, leaning against the tunnel wall. "Saw patches like this, deeper in, near where the floor gave way in the archive sub-area. Seemed unstable, like walking on thin ice over a void." Cheshire approached the shimmering patch, sniffed cautiously at its edge, then deliberately walked around it, hugging the cave wall before sitting and waiting for them on the far side. "Good enough for me," Javier decided. "We go around." They skirted the edge of the strange, glassy patch, sticking close to the rough cave wall. As Samira passed it, her flashlight beam swept across its surface. For a fraction of a second, the surface didn't reflect the light. Instead, it seemed to absorb it, and within its depth, distorted images flickered stars, swirling nebulae, impossible geometric shapes, a brief, terrifying glimpse of a vast, unblinking eye. Samira gasped and snatched her light away. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror. "Saw something," Javier confirmed grimly. "Looked like space, inside the floor. Localized pocket dimension. A stabilized microreality bleed-through, Samira speculated, glancing back nervously at the shimmering patch. The core inversion. Maybe it didn't just destabilize our reality, maybe it punctured it, creating overlaps. Getting weirder, Bellwether muttered, shaking his head. Let's keep moving. They continued down the tunnel on the far side of the chamber. The passage narrowed again, forcing them single file. The dripping sound intensified, echoing strangely, as if coming from multiple directions at once. The air grew heavier, colder. Javier, in the lead, rounded another bend and stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Samira and Bellwether halted behind him. The tunnel floor ahead dipped sharply, ending in murky water that filled the passage from wall to wall. The water was eerily still, reflecting the flashlight beams like black glass. It was impossible to tell how deep it was or how far it extended. Flooded, Javier stated flatly, completely blocked. Bellwether sagged against the wall. Must be groundwater, or a coolant leak from the old hydro sector nearby. No way through. Samira shone her light across the water's surface. Something small bobbed near the far edge of the visible pool. She zoomed her beam in. A security ID card attached to a lanyard. It floated face down. Javier waded cautiously into the water. It was ice cold, soaking through his boots and trousers instantly. He moved forward slowly, probing the depth with his wrench. Knee-deep, waist-deep. The bottom was slick with mud. He reached the floating ID card, turning it over carefully. The laminated face stared blankly up at him, the photo bleached white by the water, the nameplate obscured by slime. But the departmental designation was clear: Research Theoretical Physics. One of Lee's team, Samira asked from the water's edge. Javier looked past the ID card, sweeping his light further down the flooded tunnel. The water extended into the darkness, but something else was visible now, just breaking the surface 20 meters ahead. A pale, soft shape, vaguely human, snagged on a low-hanging pipe. It floated motionlessly, face down in the black water. Before he could react, the water around his legs began to churn. Not violently, but with a thick, oily disturbance, as if something large were moving beneath the surface. Bubbles broke the black mirror of the water, releasing pockets of foul-smelling gas. The pale shape snagged on the pipe ahead twitched, a limb stirring sluggishly in the current generated by the underwater movement. Something was down there, and it was waking up. Chapter 10: Submerged Terror. The oily churning intensified, spreading outwards from the center of the flooded tunnel. The icy water surged around Javier's waist, threatening his balance on the slick, muddy bottom. The pale corpse snagged on the pipe ahead bobbed more violently, caught in the growing disturbance. Whatever moved beneath the surface was large, displacing significant amounts of water. "Javier, get out of there!" Samira shouted from the bank, her flashlight beam dancing frantically across the turbulent water, unable to penetrate its murky depths. Bellwether struggled beside her, trying to raise the discarded security sidearm Javier had spotted earlier, his one good hand shaking. Javier gripped the heavy wrench tighter, planting his feet. Retreating now meant turning his back on whatever was rising from the black water. He swept his own beam across the surface, catching glimpses of something pale and slick breaking the water momentarily before submerging again, not scaled, not furred, but smooth, like stretched, blanched skin. It was massive, formless, less a distinct creature and more a vast, undulating mass moving beneath the surface. The corpse ahead suddenly jerked, pulled partially under the water, then released. A section of the pale shape near the body seemed to detach, swirling sluggishly. It wasn't a single entity. It's multiple, Javier muttered, realization dawning with cold horror. He remembered the body count from Lee's theoretical physics team listed on the personnel manifests. He remembered the ID card floating nearby. He remembered the chronoton displacement, the biological effects Samira had worried about. They didn't drown. The water directly in front of him erupted. A pale, horribly human arm, swollen and elongated, burst from the depths, fingers spasming. It flopped onto the surface, trailing translucent web-like filaments before being yanked back under. More shapes stirred, rising sluggishly, limbs, torsos, fused together in grotesque, pulsating amalgamations. Victims of whatever quantum catastrophe had occurred here, reanimated or mutated into a collective, submerged horror. Javier recoiled, stumbling backwards, the icy water splashing his chest. He nearly lost his footing. He swung the wrench instinctively at another arm that surfaced near his leg, connecting with a sickeningly soft thud. The arm retracted. "Back, get back," he yelled to Samira and Bellwether. He started wadding backwards as quickly as the deep water and sucking mud allowed, keeping his light and the wrench aimed at the churning surface. The amalgamated shapes followed, slowly, clumsily, but relentlessly, pale bodies surging and falling back in the black water like some obscene collective puppet. "Can't go back," Bellwether shouted, gesturing behind them with the pistol. "Heard scraping from the tunnel entrance, way we came in." Javier risked a glance over his shoulder. Samira had her light aimed back down the tunnel. He couldn't see anything, but the dripping echo seemed different, overlaid with a faint, dry scratching sound. The horror, or just the facility settling, either way forward through the water seemed the only path. "Overhead pipes," Javier shouted, pointing his light upwards. Thick coolant pipes and cable conduits ran the length of the tunnel, suspended about a meter below the ceiling, maybe half a meter above the current water level. "Can we traverse them?" He reached the bank where Samira and Bellwether stood, scrambling out of the frigid water, teeth chattering. He looked up. The pipes were thick, dusty, slick with condensation in places. It would be a perilous hand-over-hand traverse, especially for Bellwether with his shattered arm. "No choice," Bellwether grunted, tucking the pistol into his belt. It looked old, possibly damaged by the water. He clearly didn't trust it. The churning in the water reached the bank, pale shapes bumping against the muddy edge, eyeless faces and slack jaws briefly visible beneath the surface before sinking again. The smell was putrid, swamp gas mixed with decay. Javier found a low-hanging support strut and hauled himself upwards, grabbing onto a thick coolant pipe. It was cold, slippery. He tested his grip, then began shuffling sideways, hand over hand, legs dangling just above the grasping reach of the things in the water. "Samira, you next. Then Bellwether will help you." Samira holstered her flashlight momentarily, found a handhold, and pulled herself up onto a parallel data conduit. She moved carefully, her smaller frame finding balance more easily. Bellwether watched them, his face grim. He looked down at his splinted arm, then at the pale shapes bumping against the bank below. He took a deep breath. Suddenly, Cheshire appeared, walking nonchalantly along the top of the very pipe Javier was traversing. The cat moved with effortless grace, weaving around support struts, seemingly oblivious to the horror below or the precarious height. It reached a point about 10 meters along the pipe, near where the drowned corpse was snagged, then sat, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, watching them. "Damn cat," Bellwether muttered again, but he used his good arm to grab the support strut. Javier reached back, offering a hand. Samira did the same from her conduit. Together, they managed to haul the heavier man upwards until he could precariously grip the main coolant pipe beside Javier. Progress was tortuously slow. They moved hand over hand, muscles straining, legs dangling inches above the dark water where the amalgamated bodies stirred and bumped against each other. The pipes were slick, their hands numb from the cold metal. Bellwether relied entirely on his good arm, his breath coming in ragged gasps, pain etched on his face. They shuffled past the snagged corpse. Javier avoided looking directly at it but caught a glimpse of the bleached, waterlogged face, eyes eaten away, jaw locked in a silent scream. He focused on the pipe ahead, on the rhythmic shuffle of his hands, on placing his weight carefully. They reached the point where Cheshire sat waiting. The cat looked at Javier, then deliberately looked down at a section of pipe slightly ahead. Javier followed its gaze. A thick layer of greasy, black slime coated the pipe for the next meter, making it virtually impossible to grip. "Problem," Javier grunted, stopping their slow progress. "Pipes coated, too slick." Samira, on the parallel conduit, examined her path. "This side, too, looks like solidified coolant leak." Below them, the pale shape stirred more actively, bumping against the pipes, a distended hand flopping momentarily onto Javier's boot before sliding off. They were trapped mid-traverse. Cheshire stood up, stretched languidly, then leaped gracefully across the gap, from the coolant pipe to the data conduit beside Samira, landing silently. It walked past her, then hopped back onto the main coolant pipe beyond the slick section, turned and looked back at them expectantly. "Show off," Javier muttered. He looked at the slick patch again, then at the dark water below, then at the narrower but cleaner data conduit Samira was on. "Have to switch pipes, swing across." "With him," Samira gestured towards Bellwether with her chin. Bellwether shook his head, his face pale. "No strength, left arm." Javier looked at the gap, less than a meter. He might be able to swing himself across. He could try to help Samira across, but Bellwether. From behind them, back towards the tunnel entrance they'd used, a loud metallic screech echoed down the passage, followed by a heavy grinding sound. The sound of the hidden concrete door giving way. Chapter 11. Auxiliary Signals. The screech of tearing metal from behind jolted them. The hidden door hadn't held. Whatever hunted them from the archive subfloor was coming. Javier's gaze snapped from the slick pipe ahead to the churning water below to the dark tunnel entrance behind them. They were caught. No time, Javier decided instantly. He looked at Bellwether. Marcus, wrap your legs tight around the pipe. Hold on with your good arm, don't let go. Bellwether nodded grimly, tightening his grip, his knuckles white. Samira, Javier commanded, shifting his weight carefully. Get ready to swing. I'll brace you from this side, grab the conduit, then pull him across after. It was a desperate, flimsy plan. Before they could execute it, Cheshire acted again. The cat, sitting on the pipe beyond the slick patch, let out a piercing yowl, not of fear but sharp command. It stared intently not at them but at the ceiling directly above the impassable section of pipe. Javier followed the cat's gaze. A junction box, heavily rusted, was mounted on the low ceiling. From its base hung a loop of thick, old power cable, severed crudely at the end, dangling like a forgotten vine just within reach. The cable, Javier realized. He reached out, fingers stretching. He could just brush the frayed end. He swung his body slightly, catching the thick, rubberized cable. It felt solid, anchored firmly within the junction box. Yes, a handhold. He used the cable to swing his legs forward, bypassing the slick section, finding purchase for his boots on the cleaner pipe beyond. He held the cable steady. Samira, use the cable. Samira reached out, grabbed the dangling loop, and swung herself across the hazardous section onto the pipe beside Javier. Relief washed over her face. Bellwether, Javier extended the cable back towards the injured man. Grab hold, we'll pull. Bellwether reached out with his good hand, fingers straining. He caught the end of the cable. Javier and Samira pulled together, counterbalancing his weight, guiding him carefully across the slick pipe until he too had cleared the hazard. He sagged against the pipe, breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat. They didn't pause. Driven by the sounds of pursuit from behind, scraping, shuffling noises now clearly echoing down the tunnel, they continued their hand-over-hand traverse. The pipes remained solid, leading them further into the darkness above the black water. The amalgamated bodies below seemed to lose interest, sinking back into the depths, their sluggish movements fading. After another 20 meters, the pipes angled downwards, towards a wide metal ledge built into the side of the tunnel wall. It looked like an old service platform, rusted but intact. Below it, the tunnel floor rose out of the water, covered in silt and debris but blessedly solid. Javier dropped onto the platform, muscles aching. He helped Samira down, then they carefully lowered Bellwether. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion. Samira immediately checked his splint, adjusting the bandages. "Status?" Javier asked him quietly. "Still ticking," Bellwether rasped, leaning heavily against the damp tunnel wall. "Need rest soon." Cheshire hopped onto the platform beside them, shook one paw fastidiously, then began exploring the debris littering the far end of the ledge. Javier swept his light down the tunnel ahead, solid ground curving out of sight. The dripping continued, but the air smelled less stagnant here, still damp and earthy, but with a faint undertone of ozone and machinery. Auxiliary control should be close, he surmised. They rested for only a minute, catching their breath, listening intently. The sounds of pursuit seemed to have faded, perhaps halted by the flooded section, or perhaps finding another way around. They couldn't afford to assume safety. "Let's go," Javier urged, helping Bellwether to his feet. They followed the tunnel as it curved, the floor becoming drier, littered with fallen rocks and discarded remnants of old construction, rusted tools, empty chemical drums. The walls transitioned from rough-hewn rock back to stained, aging concrete, indicating they were re-entering a constructed part of the facility. They came to a heavy steel bulkhead door, similar to those on the upper levels but older, pitted with rust. A manual locking wheel, like on a submarine hatch, was set in its center. Stenciled letters, barely legible under grime, read, AUXCTRL Sector 7G. Javier gripped the wheel. It was stiff. He put his shoulder into it, grunting with effort. Rust flaked off, grating loudly. Slowly, agonizingly, the wheel began to turn, releasing internal locking mechanisms with heavy clicks. He finally spun it free, then pulled the heavy door outwards. It opened onto a scene of dated technology and recent violence. Auxiliary control was smaller than the main control room, dominated by banks of older, analog equipment, large gauges, flickering CRT monitors built into consoles, rows of chunky toggle switches. Emergency lighting, a sickly yellow, provided weak illumination, casting long shadows. Papers were strewn across the floor, a chair was overturned, and several monitor screens were shattered, glass crunching underfoot as Javier stepped inside. A dark smear stained the main console panel. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," Samira observed, cautiously entering behind him. Bellwether followed, leaning against the doorframe, scanning the room with weary eyes. Or didn't leave at all. He nodded towards a secondary console near the back wall. Slumped in the chair before it, face down on the keyboard, was a figure in a security uniform. Javier approached cautiously, wrench ready. He reached the figure, gently lifting the head. Vacant eyes stared upwards. Officer Miller, one of Bellwether's junior staff. No obvious signs of violence, but his skin had a gray, waxy pallor, and his mouth was slightly open, as if in surprise or a choked gasp. "Miller," Bellwether breathed, his voice heavy. He checked the man's neck for a pulse, finding none. "What happened here?" Samira examined the console. Miller was slumped over. It controlled local environmental systems and seismic sensors. Several displays showed error messages or static, but one small screen was active, displaying a complex waveform analysis. These readings, they're off the charts. Substructural resonance, extreme energy signatures detected deep below this level. She pointed to a timestamp in the corner, logged continuously for the past hour, getting stronger. "Seismic instability?" Javier asked. "Maybe," Samira hedged, "but the energy signature isn't geological, it's quantum, highly coherent, like the core stabilizer field, but amplified and deep underground." Cheshire, who had slipped into the room unnoticed, suddenly leaped onto the main console near the entrance, scattering papers. The cat batted playfully at a flickering amber light beside a small speaker grill. Static hissed from the speaker, then cleared slightly. A voice, distorted but recognizable, crackled through. Anyone read, "This is Dr. Lee." Repeat, "This is Jian Lee, trapped." Level 9, Geothermal Core access, containment, failing the primary resonance. It's uncontrolled, drawing power, destabilizing. The signal dissolved into harsh static, punctuated by a low, powerful hum that resonated through the very floor of auxiliary control. The amber light beside the speaker glowed brighter. The entire room vibrated slightly. From deep below their feet, a low, rhythmic pulse began. Thump, 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 like a colossal heartbeat shaking the foundations of the facility. Chapter 12: The Geothermal Anomaly. The deep, rhythmic thumping pulsed upwards through the concrete floor of auxiliary control, vibrating the consoles, rattling loose fixtures. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat resonated in their chests, a primal, terrifying rhythm originating from far below. The waveform analysis on Samira's screen spiked with each pulse, the coherent quantum energy signature surging. Level 9, Geothermal Core. Javier looked at Bellwether. "I thought that section was mothballed years ago." Bellwether nodded, his face grim, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Supposed to be. Tapped residual geothermal energy for supplemental power. Decommissioned after budget cuts. Sealed off." He gestured towards the dead security officer, Miller. "He must have picked up Lee's signal, or these seismic readings came to investigate." "And something got him," Samira finished quietly, looking at the slumped figure. "No marks, suffocation, some kind of atmospheric change, or psychic feedback from that energy source." The speaker crackled again, the static momentarily clearing. "Can't stabilize it. Feedback loop. Drawing ambient quantum uncertainty. Focusing it. Dimensional stress." Lee's voice was frantic, strained. "The cascade failure wasn't sabotage. It was phase 1. Resonance cascade initiated remotely. Used my protocols." Static drowned out the rest, leaving only the heavy thumping and the low, powerful hum vibrating through the room. "He didn't cause it deliberately." Javier processed the fragmented message. "Someone used his work, remotely, to trigger the core stabilizer inversion," Samira deduced, tapping rapidly at her console. "Using Lee's own resonance frequency research. But why? And this geothermal core connection, if it's drawing ambient quantum energy? It's becoming a new focal point for the instability," Bellwether rasped. "Concentrating it might tear the whole facility apart from the foundations up." Thump, thump, thump. The pulsing grew stronger, shaking dust from the ceiling vents. A hairline crack snaked across one of the shattered monitor screens near Miller's body. Javier moved towards the main environmental console, pushing aside scattered papers. Charts showed air pressure, temperature, and atmospheric composition for various sectors. "Samira, can you get sensors for level 9 online from here? Air quality, radiation." Samira moved to the main console, trying Miller's access codes, then Bellwether's override. "System links are patchy, severe data corruption. Trying to reroute through auxiliary conduits." Screens flickered, displaying fragmented schematics and error messages. "Got something. Minimal telemetry. Radiation levels near geothermal access are extreme, gamma exotic particles. Life unsustainable." "Then Lee is already dead," Javier stated grimly. "Or worse." Maybe not, Bellwether countered, pushing himself upright, swaying slightly. Level 9 had older shielding protocols, lead-lined observation booths near the core chamber, designed for different kinds of radiation. He looked towards a dusty facility map pinned to a nearby bulkhead. If he reached one, Cheshire leaped from the console onto the map, placing a paw directly on the section marked LVL9 GEO Core Access. The cat looked back at them, letting out a soft, insistent meow. "The cat wants us to go down there," Samira asked incredulously. "Into extreme radiation, towards the heart of whatever is causing this." "Lee might be the only one who knows how to stop it," Javier argued. "If someone used his work to start this, maybe he knows the counter-frequency, the way to reverse the resonance." He looked at the pulsing waveform on Samira's screen, then felt the floor shudder beneath his feet. "Staying here isn't an option either. This place is coming apart." Thump, thump, thump. A section of ceiling paneling overhead cracked and fell, crashing onto a console near the door. "Main access elevators are offline," Bellwether stated, studying the map. "Service shafts, likely compromised, but there's an old emergency stairwell, Shaft 7 Gamma, directly connects Sector 7G auxiliary levels to geothermal maintenance tunnels. Should be right outside this room." Javier crossed to the indicated section of the room's outer wall. It was featureless concrete, covered in grime. He ran his hand along it, feeling for seams. His fingers found a slight indentation, outlining a narrow doorway concealed beneath layers of dust and time. No handle, no visible access panel. "How do we open it?" he asked. Bellwether pointed towards the main console. "Manual override. If the power relay is still functional, big red toggle switch under the main circuit breaker panel." Javier located the panel, flipping open a protective cover. A large, intimidating red switch sat beneath rows of circuit breakers. He hesitated. Activating systems in their current unstable state was risky. It could cause power surges, trigger other failures. Samira checked her console. Localized power seems stable, routed through auxiliary batteries, but the main grid is fluctuating wildly with that energy pulse from below. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm was hypnotic, unsettling. The vibration shook the very air. Javier took a breath, gripped the heavy red toggle switch and threw it upwards. With a loud clunk and a shower of sparks from a nearby conduit, power surged. Lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied at their previous weak yellow level. On the wall Javier had inspected, faint lines illuminated, revealing the outline of the hidden door. A low pneumatic hiss sounded, and the door slid sideways into the wall cavity, revealing a dark opening and the first few steps of a steep, narrow metal staircase descending into darkness. Cold, damp air smelling of rust and deep earth flowed out. Cheshire darted into the opening immediately, disappearing down the steps. "Stairway to hell," Bellwether muttered, pulling his torn uniform tighter around himself. "Or the way out," Javier countered, unconvinced himself. He looked at Samira, then at the injured Bellwether. "Ready." Before they could move towards the stairs, a piercing electronic screech erupted from the console. Miller was slumped over. The waveform display showing the level 9 energy signature went bersuch, lines spiking off the chart. Simultaneously, all the lights in auxiliary control flickered violently and extinguished, plunging them into absolute darkness pierced only by the weak glow of their flashlights and the faint residual phosphorescence of dead CRT screens. The rhythmic thumping stopped, replaced by a deafening, rising whine from deep below the facility, and from the dark stairwell opening, a chilling gust of wind blew upwards, carrying not just cold but faint, agonized whispers and the impossible scent of ozone mixed with hot rock and something else, something infinitely alien. The unstable energy below wasn't just poolsing anymore. It was breaking loose. Chapter 13. The Seventh Gamma Descent. Absolute darkness pressed in, broken only by the twin beams of their flashlights cutting sharp cones through the thick, dust-filled air of auxiliary control. The deafening whine rising from the open stairwell seemed to drill directly into their skulls, accompanied by the chilling gust of wind that carried impossible scents and whispered fragments of despair. Miller's corpse remained slumped at the dead console, a grotesque statue in the swaying beams. The floor vibrated constantly now, a high-frequency tremor overlaid with the insistent whine. The power cut. It didn't stop the energy surge, Samira stated, her voice strained against the noise, checking the now blank screen where the waveform had gone berserk. It decoupled the local grid maybe, but the source is going critical, Bellwether finished, steadying himself against the door frame of the stairwell entrance. We move now, or we don't move at all. Javier didn't need convincing. The vibrations intensified, shaking loose screws from overhead conduits. He swept his light into the narrow stairwell opening revealed by the sliding concrete panel. Steep metal steps descended into blackness. Rust coated every surface. Cheshire was already gone, vanished into the depths. Samira, you first. Watch your footing. Bellwether, stay close behind her. I'll take the rear. Samira hesitated only a moment, then stepped through the opening, her powerful flashlight beam stabbing downwards. She immediately coughed, waving a hand in front of her face. Air is thick. Dust, spores maybe. She started down the steps cautiously. Bellwether followed, his injured arm held protectively against his chest, his good hand gripping the rusted railing tightly. Javier entered last, pulling the hidden door partially closed behind them, not expecting it to stop anything substantial, but creating at least a symbolic barrier against the chaos of auxiliary control. He played his weaker utility light around the small landing at the top of Stairwell 7 Gamma. Unlike the main stairwells, this was purely functional, utilitarian to the point of brutality. Riveted metal plates formed the steps and landings, bolted directly to the rough concrete walls of the shaft. No paint, no safety markings, just rust, grime, and decay. The whine from below was louder here, echoing oppressively in the confined metal space. The strange wind continued its upward rush, cold and carrying the scent of hot metal, ozone, and something else Javier couldn't place. A faint sweetness, like overripe fruit left to rot. The whispers seemed to cling to the wind, brushing against his ears, wordless fragments of fear, pain, confusion. They descended. The metal steps groaned and creaked under their weight, threatening to buckle. Sections of the railing were missing entirely, rusted away, leaving treacherous gaps above the darkness. Water dripped incessantly, not just from above, but seemingly weeping from the metal walls themselves, feeding thick patches of gray-green slime that coated steps and railings alike. "Careful, slime patch ahead," Samira called back, her voice slightly muffled. She carefully navigated around a particularly nasty section covering half the width of the stairs. Javier swept his light downwards, past Bellwether's slow progress. The stairwell spiraled steeply, plunging deeper than he expected. How far down was level 9? The facility maps were vague about the decommissioned lower sectors. As they descended further, the air grew warmer, contradicting the cold wind still rushing upwards. It became humid, heavy, making breathing feel laborious. The high-frequency vibration in the floor plates intensified, making their teeth buzz. "Temperature rising," Samira reported, wiping condensation from her brow. "Pressure change too. Feels like we're descending much deeper than just 2 levels." "Geothermal core," Bellwether reminded them, his breath short. "Ambient temperatures increase dramatically below level 7. They reached a small landing where the stairs switched back, continuing their downward spiral. The landing was canted at an alarming angle. Several floor plates buckled upwards as if something immense had tried to force its way through from below. Javier shone his light on the buckled plates. The metal was warped, twisted, with scorch marks around the edges. "Structural stress," he noted grimly, "or something else." As he spoke, the entire stairwell flickered. Not the lights, there were none here, but reality itself. For a fraction of a second, the rusted metal steps vanished, replaced by smooth, clean plasteel illuminated by bright white light strips. A momentary glimpse of the stairwell as it should have been, new and sterile. Then, just as quickly, it snapped back to rust, decay, and darkness. "Temporal echo," Samira breathed, stumbling slightly during the flicker. "Or sewer position bleeding deeper," Javier countered. "Watch out." They continued down, the whine from below becoming a physical pressure against their eardrums. The whispers on the wind grew more distinct, swirling around them, seeming to coalesce into partial words just at the edge of hearing. Burning, pressure, falling, trapped. Rounding another bend, Javier's light beam fell on something huddled on the steps ahead. Small, furry, unmoving. His heart leaped Cheshire, but as he got closer, he saw it wasn't the cat. It was a desiccated rat, similar to the one in the level 3 conduit, but this one was grotesquely swollen, its skin stretched taut and translucent over ballooning organs, its limbs splayed at impossible angles. It looked ready to burst. Samira gagged, averting her eyes. Extreme, biological distortion, atmospheric pressure, radiation. "Whatever it is, it gets worse the deeper we go," Javier stated. He carefully stepped around the swollen carcass. Below them, the whine abruptly changed pitch, deepening into a resonant groan that shook the entire structure. The metal stairs beneath their feet trembled violently. A section of railing further down tore free from the wall with a screech of tortured metal and plunged into the darkness below, the sound echoing endlessly. The stairwell groaned again, a long, deep metallic sigh, like a dying beast. They froze, clinging to the remaining railing, waiting for the steps beneath them to give way. Chapter 14. Pressure Point. The groans subsided, leaving only the insistent whine from below and the high-frequency vibration underfoot. The stairwell held for now, but the incident left them shaken, acutely aware of the precariousness of their passage. Every creak of the rusted metal, every drip of water, sounded like a prelude to collapse. "Move," Javier urged, his voice tight, carefully but quickly. They resumed their descent, the oppressive heat and humidity intensifying. Sweat plastered their clothes to their skin. Breathing felt like inhaling soup. The air carried a distinct metallic tang now, sharp and unpleasant, overlaying the smell of decay and ozone. Samira paused, wiping her face with a grimy hand. Metallic taste, anyone else? Javier nodded. Yeah, and my teeth feel like they're vibrating. High-energy particles, Samira diagnosed grimly. Radiation levels are climbing significantly. We're getting closer to the source. She checked Bellwether. His breathing was shallow, rapid, his face flushed despite the pallor of exhaustion. "Marcus, how are you doing?" "Peachy," Bellwether rasped, forcing a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just need to keep moving." But he leaned more heavily on the railing, his good arm trembling with the effort of supporting his weight. The stairwell continued its relentless spiral downwards. They passed sections where the outer wall had partially collapsed, revealing glimpses of the rough-hewn rock of the shaft beyond, slick with moisture and strange, phosphorescent fungi clinging in pale patches. In other places, the metal itself seemed diseased, developing bizarre crystalline growths that glittered sharp and unnatural in their flashlight beams, like solidified quantum foam. Touching them seemed unwise. The whispers swirling on the upward wind grew clearer, more persistent. They weren't just echoes of fear anymore. They carried fragments of technical jargon, desperate calculations, snatches of Lee's frantic voice from the radio transmission, all interwoven with sounds of tearing metal and agonized screams. The psychic pressure mounted, a dull ache behind Javier's eyes. It felt like the stairwell itself was saturated with the memory of panic and disaster. Suddenly, Cheshire appeared again. The cat sat nonchalantly on a rusted junction box jutting from the wall just ahead, grooming its whiskers as if oblivious to the heat, the radiation, the reality-warping energy pulsing from below. It watched them approach, then let out a soft meow and flicked its tail towards a barely visible hatch set flush into the stairwell wall, partially obscured by slime and crystalline growths. "Another hatch?" Javier questioned, approaching cautiously. This one was smaller than the others, made of the same rusted metal as the stairwell itself. No markings were visible. Samira examined it. "Not on any standard facility schematic I remember. Maybe emergency access to an old sensor conduit." Bellwether leaned closer, squinting. "Wait, 7 Gamma Sub-Alpha, old designation, leads to monitoring station for shaft stability seismics, abandoned decades ago." The hatch looked sealed tight by rust and the strange crystal formations. Why would Cheshire point it out? Was it a dead end, a trap, or a necessary detour? As they hesitated, the metal floor plates directly beneath their feet shifted. Not a vibration, but a lateral lurch, sliding sideways nearly 10 centimeters with a grating screech before slamming back into place. Javier and Samira stumbled, grabbing the railing. Bellwether cried out, nearly losing his grip as his injured arm was jostled. Stairwell integrity failing, Samira yelled over the whine. That wasn't just vibration. Cheshire yowled from the junction box, batting impatiently at the small hatch. Okay, Javier gritted his teeth. Maybe the main shaft was about to collapse entirely. Maybe this side passage was the only way. Bellwether, Samira, brace yourselves. Try to clear these crystals. He raised the wrench, preparing to pry or smash the hatch open. He chipped away at the brittle crystalline growths around the hatch's edge. They shattered like glass, leaving sharp edges. Beneath them, the metal was deeply corroded. He wedged the claw of the wrench into the seam. Putting my back into it. Stand clear. He threw his weight against the wrench, straining. Metal groaned, rust flaked away. He heaved again. With a final shriek of tortured metal, the hatch buckled inwards, partially detaching from its rusted hinges. Foul, stagnant air billowed out, smelling of chemical residue and decay. Javier pulled the ruined hatch further open, shining his light inside. A narrow, cylindrical tunnel, barely a meter wide, lined with smooth, dark ceramic tiles, now cracked and coated in grime. Thick bundles of ancient, brittle-looking cables lay loose on the floor. It led horizontally into darkness. Looks clear, Javier reported, panting slightly. Smells awful. Cheshire leaped from the junction box, darted through the opening, and vanished into the tunnel's gloom. After the cat, Bellwether decided, already moving towards the opening despite his obvious pain. Anywhere but this collapsing death trap. Samira went first, squeezing through the narrow opening. Bellwether followed with difficulty, Javier helping him through. Javier entered last, pulling the buckled hatch partially closed behind them, though it offered no real barrier. They stood clustered in the entrance of the narrow ceramic tunnel, the deafening whine and vibrations from the main stairwell slightly muffled, replaced by the close silence and the smell of chemical decay. Their flashlights cut weak paths through the absolute darkness ahead. Chapter 15. Phased Barriers. The ceramic-lined tunnel offered a brief respite from the immediate threat of the collapsing Stairwell 7 Gamma, but it was profoundly unsettling. The silence felt heavy, unnatural, after the constant whine. The air was thick with the cloying smell of chemical cleaners that had failed to mask underlying decay. Cracked tiles underfoot crunched like bones. Loose cables snagged at their ankles. Old chemical transport conduit, Samira speculated, running her light beam over the smooth, grimy walls. Or shielded sensor relay. Leads west, Bellwether offered, leaning against the curved wall, conserving his strength. Towards the older rock lab sections, parallel to the geothermal core, but further out. He winced as he shifted his weight. Still our best bet to bypass whatever is happening in the main access shaft. Javier took the lead again, moving cautiously down the narrow passage. It felt colder here than the stairwell, a damp chill emanating from the ceramic walls. Their flashlight beams seemed oddly absorbed by the darkness ahead, penetrating only a few meters. After about 50 meters of straight passage, they encountered the first anomaly. The tunnel ahead appeared, blocked, not by a cave-in or a door, but by a shimmering, translucent barrier that rippled like disturbed water. It stretched from wall to wall, floor to ceiling, emitting a faint, multicolored luminescence. Through it, they could dimly perceive the continuation of the tunnel, but distorted, wavering, as if viewed through thick, flawed glass. Javier stopped well short of it, aiming his light. The beam passed through, scattering slightly, illuminating the tunnel beyond, but the barrier itself remained, shimmering, ethereal. What now? Phased matter, temporal distortion. Samira approached cautiously, extending a hand towards the barrier, stopping centimeters away. She felt no heat, no pressure, but the air near it hummed with static electricity, making the fine hairs on her arm stand on end. Feels like a high-energy field, but passive. Maybe a side effect of the level 9 resonance interacting with old shielding in these walls. Cheshire suddenly reappeared, walking out of the shimmering barrier from the other side as if it were merely a curtain. The cat shook its head, sneezed, then sat and began meticulously cleaning phantom dust from its whiskers, looking utterly unconcerned. The cat went through, Javier noted. Solid matter can pass. Bellwether shook his head. Or the cat isn't entirely solid matter anymore. Javier hesitated. Walking through an unknown energy field felt like suicide. He prodded the barrier gently with the end of his wrench. The metal tool passed through without resistance, emerging on the other side, but the section of the wrench within the field seemed to blur, its edges momentarily indistinct. He pulled it back quickly. No apparent damage. Localized quantum tunneling field, Samira wondered aloud, allowing matter to pass through probabilistically, or maybe it only affects certain energy states. She looked at the cat, then back at the barrier. Only one way to know. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, pushing her hand slowly into the shimmering field. Her eyes widened slightly. Feels strange, tingling, like dipping your hand into carbonated water, but everywhere at once. She pushed further, her arm disappearing into the luminescence up to her shoulder. She pulled it back, no visible effects. Seems okay. She took another breath and walked through. She emerged on the other side, shaking her head slightly as if clearing mental cobwebs. Disorienting, like reality. Stuttered for a second, but I'm through. Javier looked at Bellwether. The injured man nodded grimly. Go. Javier stepped into the field. The sensation was bizarre, a full-body tingling, a momentary sense of disconnection, like his atoms were being gently pulled apart and reassembled. He felt a wave of dizziness, saw flashes of color behind his eyelids. Then he was stumbling forwards, emerging beside Samira. He shook his head, the disorientation fading quickly. Bellwether followed, hissing in pain as the tingling field aggravated his injuries, but he pushed through, leaning heavily on the wall as he emerged. They took a moment to recover, breathing deeply. They continued down the tunnel, encountering two more shimmering barriers, identical to the first. Each passage felt slightly more disorienting than the last, the brief moment of dissociation lingering longer. Javier worried about cumulative effects, but there was no alternative route. After the third barrier, the tunnel began to slope downwards more steeply. The air grew noticeably warmer again, and the low, resonant hum that had replaced the whine became audible once more, growing steadily louder. They could feel it vibrating through the ceramic tiles beneath their feet. They were getting closer to the source. The tunnel ended abruptly, opening into a vast, dark space. They stepped out onto a narrow metal catwalk. Below them stretched a colossal cavern, far larger than any chamber indicated on the upper-level facility maps. This was Level 9. The air was hot, thick with the smell of ozone and sulfur. The resonant hum was deafening here, pressing in from all sides. Dim emergency lights, spaced far apart high overhead near the cavern ceiling, cast pools of weak, sickly green light, leaving most of the space in deep shadow. Complex arrays of massive pipes, geothermal converters, and strange, crystalline structures filled the cavern floor far below, all converging on a central structure bathed in an intense, pulsating violet light. The geothermal core. The core itself was barely visible through the overwhelming violet energy radiating from it, a blinding sphere of power that pulsed in time with the resonant hum, sending waves of tangible force washing through the cavern. The air near the core shimmered with heat distortion, and something else, reality itself, seemed thin there, unstable. Strange geometric shapes composed of pure light flickered in and out of existence around the pulsating sphere. Dios, Javier breathed, staring at the terrifying spectacle. That's the source. The energy readings are astronomical, Samira said, awe and fear battling in her voice. It's acting like a focused quantum singularity, sucking in ambient energy, distorting space-time. From the catwalk near the cavern's far wall, maybe 50 meters away, a faint light flickered, a handheld flashlight beam, waving weakly. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the violet glare from the core. "Dr. Lee," Javier shouted, his voice barely audible over the hum. The figure waved the light again, beckoning them. As they started along the catwalk towards the figure, the structure groaned. The metal walkway beneath their feet vibrated violently, not from the core's resonance but from something else. From the entrance tunnel they had just exited, a section of the ceramic wall exploded inwards with terrifying force. Dust and debris showered the catwalk. Standing silhouetted in the ruined opening, hunched and impossibly tall, its featureless head sweeping the cavern, was the observation horror. It had found them again. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. Chapter 16, Catwalk Gambit. The observation horror stood silhouetted in the ruined tunnel entrance behind them, a figure of impossible angles and shifting darkness against the faint light filtering from the passage they'd just traversed. It didn't move immediately, its featureless head slowly sweeping the vast cavern, taking in the pulsating violet glare of the geothermal core, the distant figure of Dr. Lee and them, trapped on the narrow metal catwalk. The resonant hum from the core seemed to intensify, the air vibrating with contained power. Trapped, Bellwether breathed, his good hand instinctively going to the unreliable pistol tucked in his belt. "Catwalk's a bottleneck." "We can't go back," Javier stated grimly, eyes darting between the horror and Dr. Lee waving his weak flashlight frantically across the cavern. "Forward, towards Lee. Now." "How?" Samira asked, her voice tight. "It's blocking the path behind us and this walkway. It feels ready to shake apart. The metal beneath their feet trembled constantly with the core's resonance. Javier scanned their surroundings. The catwalk stretched ahead, suspended over the cavern floor littered with machinery and crystalline structures. Smaller pipes and conduits ran alongside and beneath the walkway. Below the horror, near the tunnel entrance, a particularly large coolant pipe junction looked corroded, ancient. Distraction, Javier decided quickly. Samira, your light, keep it moving. Don't fixate on the creature, but illuminate the area around it. Bellwether, if you can use that pistol, aim for the pipe junction beneath the tunnel entrance. Don't try to hit the thing, hit the pipe. Maybe cause a rupture, steam release. Anything to make it hesitate. Bellwether nodded, drawing the old sidearm. He braced himself against the railing, thumbing the safety off with difficulty. Got maybe 3 rounds left in this antique. Make them count, Javier said. He turned towards Lee. Lee, stay put, we're coming. He wasn't sure if the physicist could hear him over the hum. He hefted his wrench. Samira, stay behind me. Bellwether, when you fire, we move fast. Samira aimed her powerful beam, sweeping it near the tunnel entrance, carefully avoiding painting the horror directly, illuminating the corroded pipes instead. The horror remained still, seemingly observing, its form subtly shifting at the edge of vision. Now Marcus, Javier yelled. Bellwether raised the pistol with his one good arm, squinting against the gloom and the core's glare. He fired. The shot cracked loudly, echoing strangely in the vast cavern, momentarily overriding the hum. The bullet sparked harmlessly off the rock wall near the entrance. He adjusted his aim, compensating. Fired again. This time, the round struck the corroded pipe junction squarely. With a screech of tortured metal, the junction ruptured. A plume of pressurized, scalding steam erupted upwards, engulfing the tunnel entrance and the space where the horror stood. The creature recoiled violently, its form dissolving into incoherent shadows within the white cloud, letting out a silent, psychic shriek that lanced through Javier's mind. Move, Javier shouted, pushing Samira forward. They ran along the trembling catwalk, boots clanging on the metal grating. Javier risked a glance back. The steam cloud billowed, obscuring the entrance. The horror was momentarily contained or disoriented. Bellwether stumbled after them, pistol held loosely, his face contorted in pain from the recoil. They covered half the distance to Lee's position when the catwalk ahead groaned ominously. A section just before the platform where Lee waited buckled downwards, support struts tearing free from the cavern wall with a shower of sparks. The metal walkway sagged dangerously, creating a gap nearly 2 meters wide. Jump, Javier urged, not breaking stride. He launched himself across the gap, landing heavily on the far side, the impact jarring his teeth. Samira leaped immediately after, landing lightly beside him. Bellwether reached the buckled section, stopping short. He looked down at the drop, then at the gap, then back towards the dissipating steam cloud where shadows were already beginning to coalesce again. He shook his head. Can't make it. Arm. Lee, help him, Javier yelled, turning towards the physicist who was only meters away now on the wider platform. Dr. Jayan Lee scrambled towards the edge of the platform near the gap. He was shockingly thin, his lab coat hanging loosely on his skeletal frame. His face was gaunt, eyes wide and haunted, reflecting the violet coralite. He extended a trembling hand towards Bellwether. "Marcus, grab on." Bellwether took a tentative step onto the sagging section, reaching out. Just as their fingers were about to touch, a violent pulse of energy surged from the geothermal core. The violet light flared blindingly, and a wave of tangible force slammed into the catwalk. The already weakened section Bellwether stood on tore completely free, plunging downwards into the shadows below with a deafening crash. Bellwether vanished with it. "Marcus!" Javier screamed, lunging towards the broken edge, but Lee grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Too late, he's gone," Lee shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "We have to move now before the next pulse." Samira stared in horror at the empty space where Bellwether had been, her face pale. Below, there was only darkness and the faint echo of crashing metal. From across the cavern, the steam cloud dissipated completely. The observation horror stood fully reformed near the tunnel entrance, its featureless head slowly turning towards them. It started moving along the catwalk, flowing across the metal grating with unnatural speed, closing the distance. Chapter 17, Core Truths. "This way, quickly." Dr. Lee grabbed Samira's arm, pulling her away from the broken edge of the catwalk, back towards the relative safety of the wider platform built against the cavern wall. Javier, numb with shock and adrenaline, followed automatically, casting one last look down into the darkness where Bellwether fell before turning his back. The horror flowed along the remaining catwalk behind them, relentless, inexorable. Lee led them scrambling towards a heavy-looking blast door set into the rock wall at the back of the platform. Beside it, nestled against the wall, was a small, shielded observation booth constructed of thick leaded glass and reinforced steel, the type Bellwether had mentioned. Its viewport, facing the core, glowed faintly from interior lights. Inside, the booth shielding offers some protection. He fumbled with a keypad beside the blast door, his fingers trembling too much to enter the code correctly. Javier pushed him aside gently. "Code. Standard Level 9 Override. 947 Gamma Alpha," Lee stammered. Javier punched in the code. With a pneumatic hiss, the heavy door slid open, revealing the small, cramped interior of the booth. It contained a single chair bolted to the floor facing the thick leaded glass viewport, and a compact console covered in complex readouts and controls, most of them dark. They scrambled inside. "Close it," Lee shrieked, pointing back towards the catwalk. The observation horror was less than 20 meters away now, flowing across the metal grating. Javier slammed his hand onto the large door cycle button inside the booth. The blast door hissed and began to slide shut just as the horror reached the platform outside. For a heart-stopping moment, Javier thought its shifting form might try to flow through the narrowing gap, but the door slammed shut with a heavy, echoing thud. Locking bolts engaged with satisfying clicks. They stood in the sudden, relative silence of the shielded booth, chests heaving, the deafening hum and vibration from the core significantly muffled by the thick walls and glass. Only a low thrum penetrated the shielding. Outside the viewport, the cavern stretched away, dominated by the blinding, pulsating violet sphere of the geomotor core. Strange lights flickered around it. The empty catwalk stretched back towards the ruined tunnel entrance. The horror was nowhere to be seen. "Did it get sealed out?" Samira asked, her voice trembling. Lee shook his head frantically, gesturing towards the viewport. "No, look!" He pointed a skeletal finger towards the thick leaded glass. Clinging to the outside of the viewport like a monstrous silhouette against the core's glare was the observation horror. It pressed against the glass, its form indistinct, featureless, somehow absorbing the light. It wasn't trying to break in, it was just watching them, or waiting. Javier felt a cold dread seep into him, trapped again. This time in a shielded box with a quantum nightmare plastered against the only window. He turned to Lee. "All right, doctor, talk fast. What is that thing? What happened here? And how do we stop it?" Lee collapsed into the bolted chair, running trembling hands through his thinning hair. "The resonance cascade. I detected the trigger signal. The frequency overrides. Matched protocols from my theoretical Planck barrier interaction models. Someone weaponized my research." "Who?" Javier demanded. "I don't know," Lee cried, agony in his voice. "The signal originated off-site, routed through decommissioned deep space comm relays, untraceable, but the target wasn't the QFS stabilizer on level 1. That was just collateral damage, phase 1. "Phase 1 of what?" Samira asked, approaching the console, examining the few active readouts. "Phase 2 was the geothermal core," Lee explained, gesturing weakly at the pulsating violet sphere outside. "The resonance frequency was designed to interact with unique energy signatures here. The residual geothermal energy, the exotic particle decay from deep Earth strata. It created a feedback loop, amplifying ambient quantum uncertainty, drawing it here like a gravity well. This core, it's not generating power anymore. It's consuming reality." "Consuming reality," Javier repeated, disbelieving. "The instability isn't just local anymore," Lee said, his eyes wide with terror. "The focused resonance. It's thinning the walls between dimensions on a fundamental level. Those lights around the core, those aren't energy discharges, they're glimpses into other universes, into the quantum foam itself. If it breaches full containment." "What happens?" Samira prompted, her face pale. "Localized reality collapse," Lee whispered. "Expanding outwards, it wouldn't just destroy the facility. It could unravel this entire region. Maybe more, a chain reaction." Thump crack, something heavy slammed against the outside of the booth door. The horror was testing the barrier. "And the creature?" Javier asked, glancing nervously at the door, then back at the silhouette clinging to the viewport. "A side effect," Lee choked out, "manifested from the focused uncertainty, drawn to observation, to consciousness. A predator born from dissolving probabilities. The core's energy seems to anchor it, strengthen it." Another heavy thump against the door. The metal creaked. "How do we stop the core?" Javier demanded. Lee pointed a shaking finger at the console in front of him. "My research. The resonance frequency. It has a null sequence, a counterpulse. If I can input the sequence directly into the core's regulatory matrix." "Then do it." "I can't," Lee cried. The remote trigger signal locked me out of the primary controls, and the core's energy field is too intense now. It disrupts any remote signal from this booth. The null sequence has to be input manually. Manually, Samira echoed. Where? Lee gestured towards the pulsating violet sphere visible through the viewport. There's a failsafe terminal, emergency shutdown access, located on the primary coolant conduit manifold, right at the base of the core. Javier stared at the location Lee indicated. A small platform, barely visible through the blinding violet glare and reality distortions, situated terrifyingly close to the singularity-like energy source. Reaching it would mean traversing the final section of catwalk, descending onto the cavern floor, and approaching the core directly. Into the heart of the extreme radiation, the dimensional stress, the flickering lights that were glimpses into other realities. Thumbcrack screch. The booth door buckled inward slightly, metal tearing at the upper hinge. The observation horror was finding a weakness. They didn't have much time. Chapter 18, Null Sequence. The shriek of tearing metal from the booth door galvanized them. The horror was breaking through. Outside the viewport, its silhouette shifted, intensifying, seeming to draw power from the nearby core. The null sequence, Javier demanded, turning Lee around in the chair to face the console. Show me, now. Lee's fingers flew across the few functioning keys, bringing up a complex string of alphanumeric characters and quantum mathematical symbols on the small display. This is it, the complete sequence. It has to be entered precisely. One wrong character and it could destabilize the core instantly, or worse, amplify the resonance. How do we input it? Samira asked, peering over Lee's shoulder trying to memorize the complex string. That terminal near the core. Standard alphanumeric keypad interface, Lee confirmed, but shielded against radiative interference, needs physical input. He grabbed a small, heavy-looking data slate connected to the booth's console by a thick cable. He typed rapidly, then disconnected the slate. I've loaded the sequence onto this hardened slate. Redundancy, but you still need to type it in manually. Bang! A heavy impact struck the center of the door, leaving a significant dent. The metal groaned in protest. I'll go, Javier stated, taking the heavy data slate from Lee. Samira, stay with Lee. See if you can reinforce this door, find anything to wedge against it. He looked towards the viewport at the terrifying violet core. How long do I have? The energy cycle is peaking, Lee warned, watching a readout on the console. Reality stress is reaching critical levels. Minutes, maybe less, if the core breaches containment while you're out there. Javier didn't need him to finish. He slung the heavy wrench through his belt loop. Keep that horror busy if you can. He looked at Samira. Be ready to get out of here if it goes wrong. Samira met his gaze, her expression grim but resolute. Just get back, Javier. She started looking around the cramped booth for anything heavy enough to brace against the failing door. Javier took a deep breath and hit the door cycle button. The buckled door screeched open, revealing the observation horror looming just outside on the platform, its form momentarily solidifying into a terrifying tableau of thin limbs and featureless void as Javier locked eyes with it. It recoiled slightly, surprised by the sudden confrontation, its form flickering. Javier didn't hesitate. He charged past the creature, not attempting to fight it, ducking under a vaguely arm-like appendage that swiped at him, and sprinted onto the final, narrow stretch of catwalk leading towards the core. He could feel the horror turning behind him, feel its cold, psychic pressure focusing on his back. He didn't look back. The heat buffeting him as he approached the core was intense, radiating outwards in palpable waves. The violet light was blinding, forcing him to squint, navigating by instinct as much as sight. The resonant hum vibrated through the metal catwalk, through the soles of his boots, up his legs, into his teeth. Reality flickered at the edges of his vision, glimpses of impossible landscapes, swirling colors, vast alien geometries, bleeding through from whatever dimensions the core was tearing open. He reached the end of the catwalk. Below him, a short, sturdy ladder led down about 5 meters to the small maintenance platform at the base of the core, just as Lee had described. The platform housed the emergency terminal. Javier slung the data slate securely across his chest and began the descent, the ladder rungs hot to the touch even through his gloves. As he climbed down, a pulse from the core washed over him, stronger than before. He felt a profound wave of nausea, dizziness, disorientation. His vision swam. For a terrifying moment, the ladder seemed to dissolve beneath his hands, replaced by fractal patterns of light. He clung on tightly, gritting his teeth, riding out the wave. It passed, leaving him shaking, the ladder solid again beneath him. He dropped the final meter onto the small platform. It vibrated intensely. The core loomed directly above him, a sphere of raw, uncontrolled power, violet lightning arcing across its surface. Reality itself seemed thin here, stretched taut, threatening to rip open. The heat was blistering. The noise was a physical blow. He located the terminal, a small, hardened console built into the coolant manifold, its screen surprisingly clear, displaying a simple, awaiting input prompt. He pulled out the data slate Lee had given him, propped it beside the terminal and began typing, forcing his fingers to move precisely despite the shaking, the heat, the sensory overload. He entered the first block of the null sequence. The terminal screen registered the characters. He started on the second block. Behind him, back on the catwalk, he heard a screech of metal, Samira and Lee trying to hold the booth door, or the horror finally breaking through completely. He couldn't look back. He focused on the sequence, on the keys, blocking out the chaos. He typed the third block, fourth. The violet light from the core pulsed erratically now, the hum becoming discordant, threatening. He felt another reality wave building. Fifth block. He glanced at the slate, then back at the screen, double-checking each character. Sixth block, almost there. A shadow fell over him. Long, thin, impossibly distorted by the core's light. Javier froze, fingers hovering over the keypad. He slowly looked up. The observation horror stood on the catwalk directly above him, peering down, its featureless head tilted as if in curiosity. It hadn't tried to follow him down the ladder. It had simply flowed, or perhaps reality had bent, placing it there. It raised one thin, shadowy limb, pointing not at Javier but at the pulsating core above him. From the entity, the psychic whispers returned, clearer now, filled with a strange alien awe. beautiful, completion, opening, gateway. The core pulsed violently. The platform bucked beneath Javier's feet. The reality wave hit far stronger this time. Javier cried out as his vision dissolved into pure, searing white light, the sensation of his atoms being scattered across infinite dimensions washing over him. He felt himself losing consciousness, falling into the light, the null sequence unfinished. Chapter 19. Against the White. The white light consumed everything. Javier felt his consciousness fragmenting, dissolving into the searing, dimensionless void pouring from the reality rupture centered on the geothermal core. The intense vibration of the platform, the blistering heat, the deafening hum, all faded, replaced by an immense, crushing silence and the sensation of being stretched infinitely thin across eternity. The null sequence unfinished. Samira, Lee, bellwethers fall, distant echoes losing meaning. The observation horror's alien awe seemed suddenly understandable, a siren call to embrace the beautiful, terrifying purity of dissolution. Completion, opening, gateway. The whispers weren't just psychic pressure anymore. They felt like truth. Just as his grip on awareness began to fail completely, something small and sharp pricked his hand resting near the emergency terminal keypad. Pain. A tiny, grounding point of familiar sensation in the overwhelming white. He forced his dissolving consciousness to focus on it. Through the blinding glare, a shape resolved fuzzily near the terminal. Orange. Furry. Cheshire sat beside the console, one claw delicately extended, having just pricked Javier's finger. The cat looked up at him, blinked slowly, then let out a soft, perfectly ordinary meow that cut through the crushing silence like a laser beam. The meow, the pinprick of pain, the familiar sight of the incongruous feline anchor, it was enough. Javier gasped, pulling his awareness back from the brink, slamming it back into his physical body with jarring force. The white light receded slightly from the center of his vision, though it still burned fiercely at the periphery. The heat, the noise, the vibration slammed back into him. He looked at the data slate, then the keyboard, the final block of the sequence. His fingers trembled violently, but he forced them into motion, driven by raw survival instinct and the sudden, fierce rejection of the void's allure. He typed, G-size 7 Omega Rho. Each keystroke felt monumental. Above him, the horror remained poised, seemingly transfixed by the core's escalating instability or perhaps momentarily stunned by Javier's refusal to succumb. Its form pulsed in time with the violet energy. Javier's finger hovered over the final key, the large execute button on the hardened terminal. He slammed his fist down onto it. The terminal screen flashed, null sequence accepted, initiating core resonance shut down. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. The core pulsed, the light burned, the horror watched. Then the change began. Chapter 20. Resonance Cascade Collapse. The core did not simply power down. The resonant hum didn't fade. It inverted, imploding into a sound that felt like tearing fabric on a cosmic scale. The blinding violet light fluctuated wildly, then collapsed inwards, turning a searing pure white, then pitch black, sucking all light and energy towards its center like a miniature black hole. A shockwave, not of force but of anti-force, radiated outwards, a wave of absolute null probability. Javier, standing mere meters away, felt it hit. It wasn't pain, it was absence. The heat vanished instantly, replaced by numbing cold. The noise ceased, replaced by absolute silence that pressed painfully on his eardrums. His vision grayed out, saturated by the brief flash of white light, leaving him momentarily blind. The platform beneath him shuddered violently, not from vibration, but from the sudden cessation of the immense forces that had been stressing it. He instinctively dropped flat, shielding his head as small pieces of debris rained down from the cavern's ceiling, dislodged by the abrupt pressure change. Above him, where the horror had loomed, there was a soundless shriek of dissolving shadow. The null probability wave struck the entity, and its form, born of quantum uncertainty, seemed to unravel catastrophically. Its silhouette flickered, stretched thin, then snapped like an overtuned string, dissolving into drifting motes of utter blackness that were immediately sucked towards the collapsing core and vanished. The predator born of dissolving probabilities was unmade by their forced stabilization. Inside the shielded booth, Samira and Lee watched in terrified awe through the viewport as the violet sphere imploded. The thick leaded glass groaned under the sudden pressure differential but held. The silhouette of the horror vanished from the outer surface of the glass as the null wave passed. The booth door, already damaged, rattled violently in its frame, but remained shut. The intense thrumming that had penetrated the shielding abruptly ceased, leaving an almost painful silence. Back on the platform, Javier's vision slowly returned, resolving into grays and blacks. The blinding core was gone. In its place, where the sphere of violet energy had pulsed, there was now only darkness, a stable, empty point in space. The ambient emergency lights high in the cavern ceiling seemed brighter now, their weak green glow less oppressed. The air felt breathable again, still hot, but the intense, radiating energy pressure was gone. Dust drifted thick in the air. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint dripping of water somewhere in the vast cavern and the distant creak of stressed metal. Javier pushed himself up slowly, his muscles screaming in protest, his ears ringing in the silence. He looked up. The horror was gone. He looked towards the center of the cavern. The core was inert dark. He touched the terminal. It was cold, its screen blank. He had done it. He felt a nudge against his leg. Cheshire sat beside him, calmly grooming a forepaw, seemingly unfazed by the localized reality collapse and subsequent stabilization. The cat looked up, gave a soft chirp, then turned and began walking back towards the ladder leading up to the catwalk. Javier watched the cat, then looked back at the dark point where the core had been. Had they stopped it, or just changed it? He didn't know. But the immediate threat seemed over. He needed to get back to Samira and Lee. He started towards the ladder, his legs shaky, every muscle aching. As he reached the ladder and started the climb back up to the catwalk, a low grinding sound echoed from the far side of the cavern, near the ruined tunnel entrance they had first used, followed by a heavy, rhythmic scraping. Something else was moving in the darkness of level 9. The silence wasn't empty after all. Chapter 21: Echoes and Escape. Javier hauled himself onto the remaining section of catwalk, his body screaming from exertion and the near miss with sensory overload. He scanned the vast, dimly lit cavern. The terrifying violet core was gone, replaced by an unnerving point of darkness. The observation horror had vanished. The air was thick with dust but breathable. The silence felt vast, fragile. Across the gap where the catwalk had collapsed, the blast door to the observation booth hissed open. Samira emerged cautiously, flashlight beam sweeping the area, followed by a visibly trembling Dr. Lee. "Javier," Samira called out, relief flooding her voice. "You did it, the resonance field collapsed." She hurried to the edge of the broken catwalk. "Are you okay?" "Alive," Javier called back, his voice hoarse. "Think I stopped it, the horror. It dissolved." He looked down into the darkness where Bellwether fell. No sign, no sound, just echoing silence. The cost felt heavy. "We have to get across," Samira stated, eyeing the 2-meter gap. "Lee, is there another way around? Maintenance ladders?" Lee shook his head, still looking dazed. "No. This catwalk was the only designed access to the core platform from this side. Everything else leads deeper, towards the decommissioned sectors." From the far end of the cavern, near the ruined tunnel entrance where the horror first appeared, the rhythmic scraping sound echoed again, louder this time. Heavy. Metal on rock. Something was definitely moving over there, obscured by distance and shadow. "We don't have time to look for another way," Javier decided. He looked around his section of the catwalk. A thick bundle of loose communication cables, torn free when the walkway buckled, lay coiled near the edge. He grabbed the free end, testing its strength against a remaining railing stanchion. It felt solid. "Samira, clear the area. I'm going to try and swing this across." He anchored the cable bundle as securely as he could, then looped the heavy coil. Taking a few steps back, he ran and threw the coil with all his remaining strength. It sailed across the gap, unspooling, the weighted end clattering onto the platform near Samira's feet. "Got it," she confirmed, quickly securing the end around a solid railing post on her side. "It's rough, but it might hold as a handhold." Javier secured his end again, pulling the makeshift cable bridge taut. "Okay, Lee first, then you, Samira." Lee hesitated, looking terrified, but Samira urged him forward. Using the cable for balance and support, moving slowly, Lee managed to shuffle across the gap, nearly falling twice but held steady by Samira pulling from one side and the anchored cable on the other. Javier went next, the traverse easier for him but still nerve-wracking on the damaged structure. Finally, Samira came across, dismantling her anchor and bringing the loose end with her. They stood reunited on the wider platform outside the observation booth, the vast, silent cavern stretching before them. The scraping sound from the far side had stopped. An uneasy quiet settled again. "Where now?" Samira asked, looking at the ruined tunnel entrance blocked by the horror's earlier manifestation, and now possibly home to something else. "Back the way we came." Through those phased barriers, the collapsing stairwell, Javier shook his head. "Too risky." Bellwether mentioned auxiliary control had links to hydroprocessing. "Maybe we can find another route through older sectors." Lee shuddered. Those sectors, unstable even before the resonance cascade, full of chemical hazards, structural weaknesses. Cheshire appeared suddenly beside the observation booth door, rubbing against Lee's leg. The cat then turned and trotted towards a dark, previously unnoticed opening low in the cavern wall, almost hidden behind dormant machinery near the platform. It paused at the entrance, looking back at them expectantly. "Of course," Javier muttered. "Another cat-approved shortcut." He approached the opening, shining his light inside. It was another narrow passage, similar to the ceramic tunnel but rougher, looking like an old ventilation duct or emergency crawlspace. It seemed to lead away from the main cavern, deeper into the facility's western quadrant. "Anywhere but back there," Samira said, nodding towards the main cavern and the scraping sound's origin. They helped lead towards the opening. As Javier was about to follow Samira and Lee into the crawlspace, he paused, sweeping his light one last time across the cavern floor below. His beam caught a glint of metal near where Bellwether had fallen. He zoomed his light in. It was the old security pistol Bellwether had carried, lying near a dark stain on the rock. No sign of the security chief himself, just the gun and the stain. Javier swallowed hard, then turned and ducked into the dark passage, following the others, leaving the silence and shadows of Level 9 behind them. The faint sound of scraping echoed once more from the darkness as he pulled himself into the unknown passage. Chapter 22: Ducts of Decay. The crawlspace was suffocating, barely a meter high, forcing them onto hands and knees. It snaked away from the Level 9 cavern into utter blackness pierced only by their flashlight beams. The air was stagnant, thick with the smell of rust, mildew, and something vaguely chemical that burned the back of the throat. Unlike the smooth ceramic tunnel, this passage was rough metal, likely an old ventilation duct, its surfaces coated in decades of grime and greasy condensation. Javier took the lead, pushing aside loose debris, fallen insulation, rusted metal scraps, unidentifiable organic matter. Samira crawled behind him, constantly checking on Dr. Lee, who struggled visibly, his breathing ragged, his movements slow and labored. The physicist's mental fortitude seemed as frayed as his physical state after his ordeal near the core. Cheshire moved ahead effortlessly, occasionally waiting for them at junctions, its form sometimes flickering slightly in the unstable light, a constant reminder of the non-Euclidean reality they were navigating. They crawled in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds their own strained breathing, the scrape of knees on metal, and the distant, ever-present dripping of water echoing from unseen sources. The passage twisted, turned, rose, and fell, clearly not following any standard facility grid. "Old service ducts," Lee murmured occasionally when his breath allowed, "built during initial excavation, before full stabilization protocols, less shielding." They encountered sections where the duct walls were warped inwards, threatening collapse, forcing them to squeeze through narrow gaps. In other areas, the floor plates were missing, revealing dark drops into underlying cavities filled with stagnant water or tangled masses of corroded pipework. They crossed these gaps carefully, using loose pipes as precarious handholds. Lingering quantum weirdness manifested subtly here, less dramatic than the core's fury, but deeply unsettling. Patches of wall would momentarily shimmer with impossible colors. Strange echoes, like voices speaking backwards or machinery operating where none existed, ghosted at the edge of hearing. Once, Javier shone his light on what looked like a thick patch of mold, only for it to briefly resolve into 1,000 tiny, screaming faces before reverting to inert slime. He didn't mention it, merely pushed onwards faster. After traversing a particularly long, straight section, the duct ended at a corroded ventilation fan, its blades long seized with rust. Beside it, however, was a vertical shaft ladder, equally rusted, ascending into darkness. Up, Samira questioned, shining her light upwards. The ladder disappeared into blackness. Cheshire rubbed against the base of the ladder, then leaped agilely onto the first rung, climbing a few feet before looking down at them expectantly. "Guess so," Javier sighed. "Lee, you think you can manage a climb?" Lee looked at the ladder, then at his trembling hands. "Must try." The climb was arduous. The rungs were slick with grime, some threatening to break loose under their weight. Javier went first, testing each rung. Samira climbed below him, ready to assist Lee, who followed painfully slowly, gasping for breath, relying heavily on Samira's support. They climbed perhaps 15 meters, the air gradually becoming less stagnant, smelling more of stale, recycled air than subterranean decay. Javier reached the top, finding another crawl space branching off horizontally. He hauled himself into it, then reached down to help Samira, who in turn practically lifted Lee the final meter. They collapsed in the entrance of the new passage, chests heaving. This passage felt different, still cramped and dirty, but the walls were paneled, identifiable as standard facility maintenance access, though clearly an older section. Faded labels marked conduits carrying power and data, suggesting they might have reached the lower administrative or storage levels, perhaps level 4 or 5. As they caught their breath, a low clanging sound echoed from further down the new passage. Rhythmic, metal on metal, different from the scraping on level 9. "What now?" Samira whispered, aiming her light down the passage. Javier listened intently. Clang, pause, clang, pause. It sounded almost deliberate, like someone working or trying to break something. He exchanged a look with Samira, then cautiously started crawling forward, signaling for silence. Chapter 23: Unintended Consequences. Javier crept down the maintenance tunnel, the rhythmic clanging growing louder. He hugged the shadows, motioning Samira and Lee to stay back. He rounded a bend where several conduits junctioned, peering cautiously around the corner. Ahead, perhaps 20 meters down the passage, light spilled from an open service hatchway leading into what looked like a storage room. The clanging came from within. It wasn't rhythmic work. It was frantic, desperate smashing. Javier could hear ragged breathing, muttering. He edged closer, staying low. He peeked through the hatchway. The storage room was small, filled with shelves stacked high with old equipment components and supply crates. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single, flickering emergency light overhead, was a figure in a junior researcher's lab coat, Kenji Tanaka. The young man Javier had seen panicking on the level 2 security feed hours, or lifetimes, ago. Tanaka wasn't smashing equipment. He was desperately trying to break open a large, sealed supply crate with a length of broken metal shelving. He looked wild-eyed, grimy, his coat torn. He muttered constantly to himself, fragmented sentences about locked-down, flickering lights, and shadows that moved. Tanaka, Javier called out softly, stepping into the doorway. Tanaka spun around, eyes wide with terror, brandishing the metal shard like a weapon. "Stay back, stay away," he shrieked, stumbling backwards, cornered between the crate and the shelves. "It's you. You're one of them now, aren't you? Flickering, changing." "Easy, kid," Javier said, holding his hands up placatingly. "It's Javier Reyes, engineering, we're survivors. What are you doing?" Tanaka's eyes darted between Javier, the corridor behind him where Samira and Lee cautiously appeared, and the shadows in the corners of the room. "Survivors? Or echoes? Phased duplicates? How do I know?" He gestured frantically at the crate. "Need this, emergency rations, water purifier, been trapped. Hours, days, time keeps skipping." Samira stepped forward slowly. "Kenji, it's Dr. Khan. Samira, we're real. We survived the event on level 3, then the archive. Level 9. Tanaka stared at her, confusion warring with fear. "Level 9, no, I hid here. Level 4 storage, locked myself in when the flickering started, the shapes in the corners." He shuddered violently. "Heard things, scraping, whispers." "We need to stick together," Javier said. "We found a way up from level 9, we're trying to reach the surface." He nodded towards the crate. "Let me help with that." Tanaka hesitated, then lowered the metal shard slightly, exhaustion seeming to overwhelm his paranoia. Okay, just watch the corners." Javier used his wrench on the crate's heavy seals, quickly popping them open. Inside were indeed emergency supplies, ration bars, water packs, basic first aid glow sticks. Tanaka fell upon a water pack immediately, drinking greedily. While Tanaka recovered, Samira quickly checked Lee. The older physicist seemed semi-catatonic, mumbling fragments of equations, staring blankly. The stress, combined perhaps with lingering effects from the core's energy or the passage through the phased barriers, had pushed him too far. "He needs proper medical attention," Samira stated grimly. "And sedation. He's completely overloaded." Javier distributed rations and water. As they ate the dry, tasteless bars feeling like ambrosia, Tanaka described his ordeal. Hiding during the initial lockdown, witnessing horrifying flickers of violence in the corridors through his door's viewport, the constant fear, the disorienting temporal skips he experienced even locked away. He confirmed the level 4. They had climbed further than they thought. Suddenly, Cheshire appeared in the doorway, meowed once, and then bolted down the main corridor outside the storage room. "Where's it going now?" Tanaka asked nervously. "Usually towards the way out," Javier replied grimly, gathering the remaining essential supplies into a salvaged bag. "Or towards more trouble. Let's move. Maybe level 4 access shafts are clearer." They helped Lee to his feet, the physicist moving like an automaton, unresponsive. They exited the storage room, Tanaka sticking close, constantly glancing over his shoulder. They followed the direction Cheshire had taken, moving through dimly lit service corridors. They found the main corridor junction leading towards the level 4 emergency stairwell access. The lights here were functional, steady white fluorescence. It looked blessedly normal, but the air felt strange, statusy, and there was a faint, high-pitched whine, almost subliminal. As they approached the stairwell door, they saw why Cheshire had run ahead. The cat sat near the door, tail twitching, staring intently at the access panel. The panel wasn't just locked. It was fused, molten slag dripping from where the electronics had shorted out catastrophically. Someone or something had deliberately destroyed the mechanism from the outside. And standing beside the ruined panel, seemingly examining it, was another figure. Tall, wearing the uniform of the facility director, partially turned away from them. Director Alma Fuentes. Director, Javier called out, relief surging through him. Another survivor. The figure stiffened, then slowly turned. It was Fuentes, but her eyes, they glowed with a faint internal violet light mirroring the energy of the geothermal core. Her skin had a strange translucence and her movements were jerky, unnatural. When she spoke, her voice was layered, echoing, overlaid with static and the same faint, high-pitched whine that permeated the air. Interlopers, the Fuentes thing rasped, its head tilting at an impossible angle. The sequence was incomplete. Resonance cascade collapse, imperfect, energy seeks, conduit, consciousness, amplifies, gateway, must be stabilized. It raised a hand and arcs of violet energy crackled between its fingers. It wasn't Fuentes anymore. It was an echo, a vessel, possessed or fundamentally altered by the residual energy from the core, acting as a new focal point for the instability. Chapter 24, Surface Tension. The thing wearing Director Fuentes' face crackled with contained violet energy, its layered voice grating against their nerves. It blocked the only apparent exit route, the stairwell deliberately fused shut. Its glowing eyes fixed on them, radiating cold, alien intelligence mixed with the fractured remnants of Fuentes' ambition. Gateway must be stabilized. Requires calibration. Your consciousness patterns. Useful. Get behind me, Javier yelled, shoving Tanaka and Samira back, placing himself between them and the possessed director. He held the wrench ready, though he suspected it would be useless against raw quantum energy. Lee remained oblivious, murmuring equations. Fuentes, snap out of it, Samira pleaded, recognizing the futility even as she spoke. Whatever had happened to the director was fundamental, irreversible. The Fuentes thing tilted its head, static crackling around it. Director Fuentes recognized potential, Planck barrier interaction, resource allocation, calculated risk, unforeseen variables, external resonance trigger, accelerated timescale, opportunity. It seemed to be accessing fragmented memories, twisting them. It raised its hand again, violet energy gathering, the high-pitched whine intensifying. Cheshire, who had been watching from near Javier's feet, suddenly hissed, a sound far more vicious than usual, and darted towards the Fuentes thing. The cat leaped, not attacking, but weaving impossibly through the crackling energy between the entity's fingers, landing momentarily on its shoulder before leaping away again towards a side maintenance access panel Javier hadn't noticed before. The energy discharge sputtered, disrupted, its focus momentarily broken. The Fuentes thing staggered back, distracted by the cat's impossible passage through its energy field. Probability intrusion, anomalous feline vector, statistically insignificant, yet persistent. Now Javier seized the momentary distraction. He pushed Tanaka towards the panel Cheshire indicated. Get it open. Wrench. He tossed the heavy tool to the terrified researcher. To Samira he yelled, "Get Lee through when it opens." He charged the Fuentes thing, not hopping to disable it, but simply to keep its attention. He swung the salvaged metal shard from Tanaka's storage room adventure like a club aiming low. The entity sidestepped with unnatural speed, energy crackling, but the physical attack forced it to focus, delaying another energy assault. Behind him, Tanaka frantically worked the wrench on the access panel bolts, his earlier paranoia replaced by desperate focus. Samira pulled the unresponsive Lee towards the opening. The Fuentes thing swatted Javier aside with contemptuous ease, sending him sprawling across the corridor floor, his head smacking against the tiles. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He saw the entity turn, raising its hand again towards Samira, Lee, and Tanaka working at the panel. Violet energy gathered. Just as the energy was about to unleash, Lee suddenly stopped mumbling. His eyes focused, clearing for a moment, filled not with madness but with horrified understanding. He looked at the Fuentes thing, at the gathering energy, at the complex quantum field it radiated. Asymmetrical resonance cascade, feedback, unstable matrix. You're incomplete. You'll tear yourself apart, he shouted, his voice surprisingly strong. Lee lurched forward, stepping directly into the path of the forming energy blast. He held up his hands, fingers tracing complex patterns in the air, shouting equations, fragments of the null sequence, altered, twisted into something new. Counter-resonance, harmonic decoherence. Now. The violet energy bolt struck Lee full force, but instead of incinerating him, it seemed to absorb into him. Lee screamed, a sound of impossible agony, his body lighting up, glowing fiercely with contained violet energy. The Fuentes thing recoiled, its own energy field flickering violently, destabilized by Lee's unexpected counterfrequency. He's disrupting it. Go, Javier yelled, scrambling to his feet as Tanaka finally wrenched the panel open, revealing darkness beyond. Samira didn't hesitate. She shoved the terrified Tanaka through the opening, then hauled the glowing, screaming Lee backwards, pulling him towards the hatch even as his body convulsed, energy arcing from his fingertips. Javier scrambled after them, grabbing Lee's other arm. They tumbled through the opening into another dark service passage, just as Lee's body erupted in a final, silent flash of pure violet light, the energy discharge feeding back towards the Fuentes thing. The entity shrieked, its form flickering erratically, static discharge exploding outwards as its contained energy violently destabilized. Javier slammed the access panel shut behind them, plunging them into darkness, the echoes of Lee's final scream and the entity's shriek fading, replaced by the sound of their own harsh breathing. They lay there for a moment in the cramped dark, stunned. Lee was gone, sacrificed himself, but he might have neutralized the immediate threat of the possessed director. We have to keep moving, Samira choked out, grief and shock warring in her voice. She activated her flashlight. They were in another old duct, but this one slanted sharply upwards. Faintly from far above, Javier thought he heard a low, mechanical hum. Environmental systems, air circulation. Guided by Cheshire, who reappeared seemingly from nowhere, they began the final ascent. It was grueling, driven by adrenaline and the fatting hope of escape. They climbed ladders, crawled through vents, bypassed fused doorways. They saw more signs of the facility's distress: flickering lights, minor structural damage, unsettling patches of quantum residue, but no more active threats. The pervasive instability seemed to be slowly receding, dampened by the core's collapse, though pockets of wrongness remained. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a heavy fire door. Standard markings indicated Level 1, Access Corridor B. Level 1, the surface levels. Javier used the wrench to force the manual release, muscles straining. The door swung open. They stumbled out into a wide, brightly lit corridor. Clean white walls, polished floors, steady fluorescent lighting. It looked normal, completely, blessedly normal. Emergency klaxons were silent. No alarms blared, just the low hum of the building's primary life support. Tanaka sobbed with relief, slumping against the wall. Samira leaned beside him, exhausted but alert, scanning the empty corridor. Javier listened. Nothing. No screams, no static, no resonance hum. Cheshire walked calmly down the center of the corridor, tail held high, then sat near a large window set into the far wall. Outside the window, faint gray light filtered through the pre-dawn sky. They had made it through the night. They had reached the surface level. Javier walked towards the window, joining the cat. He looked out. No signs of destruction outside. Trees swayed gently. It looked peaceful. But he knew the facility beneath his feet was a fractured labyrinth, wounded, containing residual pockets of impossibility. He knew Bellwether was gone. He knew Lee had sacrificed himself. He knew Fuentes was changed. The gateway Lee feared might be closed, but the price was steep, and the scars on reality and on them remained. Escape wasn't an ending, just a different state. He reached down and scratched Cheshire behind the ears. The cat leaned into it, purring softly, a small point of solid, simple reality in a world that had almost dissolved into nightmare. They were out of the depths, but the labyrinth's echoes would linger. The end.